The conservatory clock stopped at exactly 11 minutes past 11, and Lady Elspeth Staveley heard the little brass lamb bell ring inside its unopened box, as if some unseen hand had warned her not to take another step. London had been full of music that night. Beyond the long glass wall of Staveley House, Mayfair glittered beneath a soft May rain, and the ballroom behind her carried the polished murmur of silk, candles, waltz music, and families pretending not to measure one another by title, dowry, and blood. Only the conservatory seemed removed from it all. Ferns pressed damp green fingers against the panes. Orange trees breathed their faint sweetness into the warm air. At the far end, the automaton clock, imported from France by her late grandfather and maintained with almost religious care, stood upon its marble pedestal, with its gilt shepherdess frozen mid-curtsy and its tiny silver sheep halted in a circle that would never complete. Elspeth looked at the clock face. 11:17. The minute hand had stopped so sharply that the tick still seemed to hang in the air. She might have noticed the oddness more quickly if her heart had not already been full. Only yesterday, in the quiet chapel at Westgrave House, she had become the wife of Valentine Marlowe, Duke of Westgrave. Not publicly, not yet. The marriage had been performed by special license, with the rector, Mrs. Annis Vale, and Caleb Thorne as witnesses, because Sir Wilfrid Prowse had moved too quickly in his schemes, and Valentine had said, in that low, controlled voice of his, that he would not let any man barter Elspeth's future while he had breath to prevent it. Tonight, he meant to announce it properly before both families. Tonight, the woman who had been useful, overlooked, and quietly pitied at every supper table would be named Duchess of Westgrave, before the very people who had always spoken of her as if she were furniture with a pulse. She had not asked him whether he loved her. She had been too proud and perhaps too afraid. But after the chapel vows, when the rain had tapped softly against the windows and the candles had bent in the draught, Valentine had taken her gloved hand, removed the glove with a care that had made her unable to breathe, and pressed his mouth to her knuckles. "I know this began with danger," he had said. "It doesn't have to remain there." She had believed him. She had believed the slight roughness in his voice. She had believed the way his thumb had rested, briefly and reverently, over the place where her pulse betrayed her. Now she stood alone in her father's conservatory, holding the parcel Valentine had sent to her private sitting room less than an hour before. A note had been tucked beneath the ribbon in his exact hand. "For the nursery we are not obliged to speak of yet, but which I have found myself imagining. V.M." She had opened the box only enough to see the small brass lamb bell nestled in pale tissue. It was no larger than a child's fist, with a loop for fastening to a cradle or a pram hood and a tiny engraving along its rim. For the little one who must never be unheard. Elspeth had laughed once, quietly, then put her fingers to her mouth because the sound had nearly broken into tears. No one had ever imagined a future for her without making it useful to themselves. Valentine had imagined a child hearing a bell. Valentine had imagined gentleness. Then the conservatory clock stopped. A second later, she heard Minerva's laugh. It came from the deeper alcove near the winter jasmine, light and breathless, the laugh her younger sister used when gentlemen had forgotten their own intentions. Elspeth stilled. She should have turned away. A secret wife had no business creeping after sounds in her father's house like a frightened maid. Yet some instinct older than dignity drew her forward. The glass wall at the end of the conservatory had darkened with rain. turning the panes into black mirrors. In one of them, between the reflection of the halted clock and the blur of candlelight, she saw Valentine. He was not in the ballroom. He was not with her father, preparing the announcement. He stood half-hidden beside the jasmine arch, one hand gripping the edge of the stone planter, the other locked around Lady Minerva Staveley's wrist. Or so Elspeth thought at first. Then Minerva swayed closer. Her pale green sleeve twisted around his cuff. Her dark hair had loosened from its pins and fallen against his evening coat. Valentine's face was turned down toward hers. White, with some emotion, Elspeth could not read from the reflection. Minerva's hand rose to his chest. His fingers closed at her elbow as if to steady her. To anyone entering at that moment onto any eye that did not know the breath before and after, they looked like lovers interrupted too late. Elspeth stopped so suddenly. The parcel struck the side of a jardiniere. The brass lambell gave one small, bright sound. Valentine's head turned, not toward the sound. Toward Minerva first. Minerva saw Elspeth in the reflection before he did. Her eyes met her sister's through the glass, and the softness fell from her face like a veil dropped on purpose. She smiled. It was not triumph in its loud form. It was worse. It was certainty. "You came too late, sister," Minerva whispered. The words were barely sound, yet the conservatory seemed to carry them with cruel precision. Valentine released Minerva at once and turned fully. Elspeth. Her name left him as if he had been struck. He took one step toward her. Minerva gave a small broken cry behind him and caught at his sleeve again. "Your Grace, please, you mustn't let her think." "Be silent," Valentine said. The command was sharp enough to cut through the rain, but it came too late. Too late. The clock said so. Minerva had said so. The stopped minute had sealed itself over the scene like wax. Elspeth looked from her sister's loosened hair to Valentine's disturbed cravat, from his pale face to the hand he had pulled free too late. Only yesterday that hand had held hers in the chapel. Only yesterday she had believed restraint could be tenderness. Now restraint looked like concealment. The door behind Elspeth opened. Lord Staveley stepped in with Sir Wilfrid Prowse at his shoulder, both men carrying the alert stillness of those who had arrived precisely when intended. "What is this?" Lord Staveley demanded, too loudly. The ballroom music faltered beyond the conservatory doors. Sir Wilfrid's eyes moved first to Minerva, then to Valentine, then to Elspeth with a look of grave calculation. "My lord," he said softly, "lower your voice. There are guests within hearing." "Elspeth," Valentine said again, and this time he came forward despite Minerva's hand falling from his sleeve. "Look at me." She did. That was the worst of it. His eyes were not cold. They were furious, bewildered, and something like afraid. She had never seen fear in the Duke of Westgrave before. It might have saved her if Minerva had not lifted one trembling hand to her throat and murmured, "I told His Grace I could not continue with this deception. I told him she would never forgive either of us." Elspeth's breath left her. Valentine turned on Minerva. "That is false." "Enough," Sir Wilfrid said, stepping between them with the smooth authority of a man who had long practiced entering other people's disasters as if summoned by Providence. "Your Grace, whatever private confusion has occurred here, the young lady's reputations must be considered. Lady Minerva has clearly been distressed. Lady Elspeth, too, appears overcome. This is no moment for public declarations." Public declarations. The words struck harder than accusation. Valentine had meant to make one. "My wife." That was all he needed to say. "My wife." 2 words could have shattered the scene, reordered the room. burned away Minerva's smile, and placed Elspeth where the law already held her. But Lord Staveley moved toward the open door, his face grey with panic. "There will be no scandal in this house tonight." "There is already scandal," Valentine said, "because you have chosen to name it wrongly." He turned back to Elspeth, and for one suspended heartbeat, she thought he would say it. She saw the decision gather in him, saw his pride and caution and fury align. "Lady Elspeth is under my protection. Under my protection, not my wife." Perhaps he meant to continue. Perhaps Lord Staveley's raised voice cut him off. Perhaps Sir Wilfrid's hand on his arm delayed the final word by only a second. But some seconds become years. Elspeth had lived all her life inside such seconds, always waiting for someone to value her before the room moved on. She would not wait now. She looked down at the parcel in her arms. The lamb bell lay among torn tissue, bright and innocent, made for a child not yet dreamed of by anyone but a man she no longer understood. She closed the lid. When she raised her eyes, Minerva's was watching her with a beauty sharpened by victory. Valentine tried to pass Sir Wilfrid. "Elspeth, don't go. You don't understand what you saw." Her mouth felt cold, but her voice did not shake. "No," she said. "I understand what I was allowed to see." His face changed not anger, pain. It moved through him quickly, then vanished beneath control. That almost undid her. Almost. But she had been the quiet daughter too long, the useful sister, the woman sent to fetch, mend, smooth, excuse, and endure. She would not collapse in a conservatory so Minerva could remember her on the floor. She dipped the smallest curtsy, not to Minerva, not to her father, but to the title Valentine had not used when it might have saved her. "Your Grace." Then she walked past them. Behind her, the automaton clock remained fixed at 11:17. The ballroom did not fall silent all at once. Silence spread in layers. A lady stopped laughing. A gentleman lowered his glass. Someone whispered Elspeth's name, in the tone reserved for women already being rewritten. She crossed the threshold, with the parcel held against her ribs and the little bell inside it, trembling at each step. She did not look back when Valentine called her. She did not look back when her father said, "Elspeth, compose yourself." She did not look back when Minerva began to weep prettily enough for witnesses. In her chamber, the fire had burned low. Her maid had been sent away. On the dressing table lay the white ribbon from her wedding gown, folded beside the gloves. Valentine had touched in the chapel. Elspeth placed the brass lamb bell box beside them and stood very still. For one terrible moment, she pressed her knuckles to her mouth, exactly where his lips had rested yesterday. Then she lowered her hand. She took out her small traveling case. Into it went the certified copy of her marriage lines, her mother's plain brooch, 2 serviceable gowns, her botanical notebook, and the unopened box with the bell. Not the wedding ribbon, not the gloves. Those she left where Valentine would find them, if he came too late again. Before dawn, Lady Elspeth Staveley, Duchess of Westgrave in law, and no one's duchess in the eyes of the world, descended the servants' stair with Aunt Matilda waiting below in a dark cloak. Outside, the hired carriage lamps shivered in the rain. Elspeth stepped into the carriage without tears. Only when the wheels began to move did the brass lamb bell ring once in the dark, small and clear, like a promise she did not yet know how to keep. By the time the hired carriage passed the last sleeping lamps of Mayfair, Lady Elspeth Staveley had learned that a woman could leave her whole life behind and still feel the shape of it pressing against her ribs. The little brass lamb bell lay wrapped in its pale tissue inside her traveling case. Cushioned between her botanical notebook and the certified copy of her marriage lines. With each turn of the wheels, it gave the faintest tremor, not enough to ring, only enough to remind her that she had taken something. Valentine Marlowe had meant for tenderness and carried it into exile like evidence of a crime. Aunt Matilda sat opposite her, a dark, narrow figure beneath a widow's veil. One gloved hand braced against the carriage strap, and the other resting over the small reticule that held what coins they could gather without waking the house. She had asked no questions when Elspeth came down the servants' stair before dawn. She had looked once at her niece's white face, once at the travelling case, and said only, "Devon first. Explanations after breakfast." That was Aunt Matilda's kindest quality. She never mistook shock for weakness. The morning opened gradually beyond the carriage glass, grey over wet cobbles, then silver over the road, south and west, and Elspeth sat very straight while London withdrew behind them. She did not weep. Tears would have made the scene too simple. Betrayal, grief, humiliation, fear. Those words were tidy enough for drawing rooms. What lived inside her was not tidy. It was the reflection in the conservatory glass. Valentine's hand at Minerva's elbow. Minerva's pale green sleeve twisted around his cuff. The clock fixed at 11:17, as though time itself had agreed to testify against him. And then his voice. "Lady Elspeth is under my protection." She closed her eyes. Protection was a half-open door. Wife would have been home. Aunt Matilda watched her for several miles before speaking. "Did he strike you?" Elspeth's eyes opened at once. "No." "Did any man lay improper hands on you?" "No." "Then I may save my pistol for another occasion." Elspeth stared at her, and despite everything, a startled breath escaped her that might almost have become a laugh if it had not hurt. Aunt Matilda's mouth did not smile, but her eyes softened. "There, you are not dead. I am not certain that is a comfort. It is the first condition of escape." The carriage lurched through a rut. Elspeth steadied the travelling case with both hands. From within came one small chime. Aunt Matilda looked at the case. "What is that?" "A bell." "For whom?" The answer rose and broke before it reached her tongue. "For the little one who must never be unheard." "For no one yet," Elspeth said. Aunt Matilda's gaze sharpened, but she let it pass. That mercy nearly undid Elspeth, more than questions would have. They reached the first coaching inn shortly after 8, a respectable place with damp stone steps, steaming horses, and a landlady who took one look at Aunt Matilda's widow's weeds and Elspeth's pale travelling dress, and decided they were gentlewomen in difficulty, which was common enough upon English roads to be served without comment. Aunt Matilda ordered tea, bread, and a private parlour for half an hour. Elspeth tried to drink. The tea smelled of tannin and smoke. Her stomach turned so sharply that she set the cup down before it rattled. "You have not eaten," Aunt Matilda said. "I cannot. You must. Please do not command me this morning." The words came out too quickly. Aunt Matilda drew back, not offended, only attentive. Elspeth pressed her fingers to the edge of the table. "Forgive me. I have been commanded enough. Then I shall request." Aunt Matilda pushed a piece of bread toward her. "Eat that much, because your body is not society, and it has done nothing to deserve punishment." Elspeth looked at the bread as if it belonged to a foreign country. Then she obeyed the request, not the command. Halfway through the second bite, the room tipped slightly. The dark panelling moved away from her. Aunt Matilda rose, swift despite her age, but Elspeth caught the table before she could fall. "I am well. You are not. It is nothing. Nothing is what foolish men call anything they do not wish to examine." Aunt Matilda went to the door and ordered hot water and a little hartshorn, then returned to kneel beside Elspeth's chair with a tenderness that had no witnesses, and therefore no performance. "When did your courses last come?" Elspeth's face went cold. For a moment, all the grief in her body rearranged itself into silence. She counted backward, the wedding, the hurried days before it, the weeks of Sir Wilfrid's pressure, of her father's evasions, of Valentine's sudden, impossible offer before that. She could not make the dates behave. "Elspeth," Aunt Matilda said softly. "Look at me." She did. "Is it possible?" The conservatory returned. Then the chapel. Valentine's mouth at her hand. The quiet after vows, when fear had not yet learned to wear Minerva's face. Elspeth looked toward the travelling case. The brass bell waited there in tissue, innocent as sunrise. "Yes," she whispered. Aunt Matilda did not gasp. She only closed her eyes once, briefly, as if accepting a burden before deciding where to set it down. Then Devon remains wise. He must not know. The urgency frightened Elspeth with its force. Not yet, not through them. Not while Minerva can stand before a room and turn any truth into shame. If he is your husband, he has rights. If he had remembered that last night, I might have had safety. Aunt Matilda said nothing. That was her answer, or perhaps her sorrow. Elspeth drew the certified copy of the marriage lines from the case and looked at it only long enough to see the names. Valentine Marlowe. Elspeth Staveley. Ink could be so calm. It recorded a life without feeling any of it. She slid the paper back beneath the notebook. "I will keep this safe. If there is a child, no one will call it nameless because I was foolish enough to trust the wrong room." "You were not foolish," Aunt Matilda said. "You were young, and they were cruel." Elspeth lifted her chin. "I was not only young, I was willing to be chosen." "There is no shame in that. There is if the choice was only convenient." Aunt Matilda's expression hardened. "Do not let your sister's malice become your own voice." The sentence struck cleanly, and Elspeth had no defense against it. Outside, horses were changed. Boots crossed the yard. Somewhere, a post horn sounded. England went on arranging itself around departures and arrivals, indifferent to the private ruins inside its carriages. They left the inn before noon. By then the rain had thinned, and the hedgerows flashed wet and green on either side of the road. Elspeth slept in brief, uneasy fragments. Each time she woke, she thought for a second that Valentine would be riding behind them. He was not. By late afternoon at Staveley House, he found what she had left. He entered her chamber without knocking, because the house had already begun to speak of her as absent, and absence made men careless with doors. The room was too neat. That was the first thing that told him she had truly gone, not fled in hysteria, not stumbled from shame. Gone. On the dressing table lay the white ribbon from her wedding gown, folded with a precision that felt like judgment. Beside it rested the gloves he had touched in the chapel. His hand stopped above them. He did not pick them up. Some remnants were not gifts. Lord Staveley hovered behind him, damp-eyed and useless. Sir Wilfrid stood near the hearth with a grave face and a sealed note. Minerva was not present. Valentine had forbidden her entry before anyone could suggest it. "Your Grace," Sir Wilfrid said, "there is a note." Valentine turned. "From whom?" "Lady Elspeth, I regret to say." Valentine took it. The handwriting resembled hers at a glance, enough to wound before it informed. "Do not follow me. I was mistaken." The words were few, too few. Elspeth wrote as she thought, with precision, restraint, and a habit of making even refusal sound honorable. This sentence had no breath in it, no mind. "No, Elspeth, where did you get this?" Valentine asked. It was found near the servants' stair, Sir Wilfrid said. A painful matter, best handled quietly. Quietly, Valentine repeated. The word emptied the room of warmth. You advised quiet last night when truth required speech. Lord Staveley flinched. Sir Wilfrid's brows drew together. I advise preservation, Your Grace. Lady Minerva's reputation has also been endangered. Valentine stepped toward him. Not quickly. That made it worse. If Lady Minerva speaks my name in connection with any expectation of marriage, I will answer publicly. She will not like the answer. Surely you do not mean to compound scandal. I mean not to marry her. The room went still. Lord Staveley whispered, but Elspeth has gone. Valentine looked down at the gloves on the dressing table. He saw again Elspeth's face in the conservatory. Not broken, not pleading, but withdrawing beyond reach with the dignity of a woman who had learned not to ask twice for her own value. He had meant to say wife. The word had been there. Then Staveley had shouted, Sir Wilfrid had stepped in, Minerva had wept, and 1 second had passed. Some seconds became verdicts. Send for Mr. Hargreaves, Valentine said. My solicitor is to begin inquiries at once, coaching inns, posting houses, any hired carriage leaving before dawn. Quietly, but thoroughly. Sir Wilfrid's jaw tightened. Your Grace, if the lady requested you not follow. Valentine lifted the note. This is not her voice. Grief changes a lady. Foros changes a hand. Sir Wilfrid went pale around the mouth. It was slight, but Valentine saw it. He saw everything now, too late. He folded the note and placed it inside his coat. And send for the man who tends the conservatory clock. Lord Staveley blinked. The clock. Valentine looked toward the window, beyond which rain moved over Mayfair like a curtain drawn after a performance. It stopped before I entered that room. No one answered. That silence taught him more than denial would have done. By evening, he had sent 3 letters in his own hand and 1 messenger south. By midnight, Minerva's first tears had already become rumour. By dawn, society had begun to decide that Lady Elspeth Staveley had fled because she was jealous, unstable, ashamed, or all 3. Valentine did not sleep. In Devon, 2 days later, Elspeth stood at the window of Rosecombe Cottage with the sea wind, pressing salt against the glass, and Aunt Matilda asleep in the chair behind her. Her faintness had passed, but knowledge had taken its place. Not certainty yet, not proof, only the possibility of a life no one else must be allowed to shape. She opened the travelling case and took out the brass lamb bell. This time, she unwrapped it fully. In the grey morning, the little creature shone with a humble glow, less like ornament than promise. She touched the engraved words with 1 finger. For the little one who must never be unheard. If you are there, she whispered to the silence beneath her own heart. I will hear you. The bell rang once, small and clear, as if answering for a future that had not yet dared to arrive. The first time Valentine Marlowe heard the little bell again, he was standing beneath a striped canvas awning in a Devon garden school, trying to listen to a widow explain drainage. 7 years had taught him how to endure impossible things in public. He could read estate reports while grief sharpened behind his eyes. He could sit through dinners where mothers pushed daughters toward him as if he were a vacant chair beside a title. He could sign letters from solicitors who had found no trace of Lady Elspeth Staveley after Exeter, no reliable direction beyond a widowed aunt's old Devon connection, no proof that she wished to be found, and no mercy in any of it. He had become expert at stillness, yet that sound undid him. It came small and bright across the garden, a clear brass note threading through children's voices, the scrape of spades, and the soft rush of June wind over the sea road, Valentine stopped reading the petition in his hand. Mrs. Kedge, the tenant widow, who had been explaining the flooded lower meadow of Westgrave's Devon holding, faltered. "Your Grace?" He did not answer. A boy of 6 or thereabouts ran between 2 rows of labelled seed trays, laughing because another child had splashed water over his shoes. He was slight, sun-browned, and untidily elegant in the way some children became when no one had crushed their spirit into performance. In one hand, he carried a wooden hoop. Fastened to it by a faded blue ribbon was a small brass lamb bell. Valentine knew it before he saw the engraving. He knew the curve of the lamb's back, the modest shine of the hammered brass, the loop made for a cradle rail. He had ordered it in London on the morning of his wedding, feeling foolish and quietly hopeful, and had told the craftsman that the sound must be gentle, because a nursery should never beguile a child awake. The boy turned. The bell chimed again. His eyes were grey, not merely grey in the common way of cloudy English weather, marlow grey, clear at the edge and darker around the pupil, the same eyes Valentine had seen in his father's portrait, in his own mirror. And once in dreams, he had never confessed to any living soul. His hand tightened around the petition until the paper bent. "Who is that child?" he asked. Mrs. Kedge looked toward the path and smiled with the unguarded affection people reserved for children who had earned it by being kind when no one required them to be. "That is Master Nicky, Your Grace, Mrs. Staveley's boy." The name struck him without sound. Staveley. The garden seemed to draw back from him. Beyond the beds of lavender and sea thrift stood a low stone cottage with roses over the lintel and a small chalkboard hung beside the door. Rosecombe Garden School. A dozen children bent over seed trays, watched by 2 women near the herb border. One was older, black-clad, with a familiar sharpness in the angle of her shoulders, Aunt Matilda. The other wore a plain dove-grey gown and a straw bonnet tied beneath her chin. She was kneeling to help a little girl loosen roots from a pot. Her gloved hands were patient. Her posture was straight. The wind shifted. She looked up. 7 years did not pass between them. They collapsed. Elspeth rose slowly, one hand resting for a moment on the edge of the potting bench. The girl beside her said something, but Elspeth did not seem to hear. Her face was older than the face in the conservatory glass, not hardened, refined by endurance. The softness he had once feared society would trample had become something quieter and stronger, like linen washed until only the true fibre remained. Valentine stepped from beneath the awning. Mrs. Kedge dipped into a hurried curtsy. Others followed when they recognized the Duke of Westgrave, and a ripple of awareness moved through the garden. The boy did not curtsy, of course. He ran after his hoop, which had rolled toward Valentine's boot. The brass lamb bell slipped free, bounced once on the gravel, and landed near Valentine's hand. He bent to retrieve it. The engraving flashed up in the sun. For the little one who must never be unheard. His breath stopped. The words he had chosen in tenderness now accused him with every year of silence. The boy stood before him, solemn now that a stranger held his treasure. "That's mine, sir." Valentine closed his fingers around the bell too carefully. He had held estate seals, death notices, writs, deeds, and his own useless wedding ring through years of unanswered searching. Nothing had ever felt as dangerous as that little bell. "Is it?" he asked. His voice was lower than he intended. "Yes. Mama says I mustn't ring it in church or near sleeping babies, but outside it's allowed. Your mama is wise. She is." The boy looked him over with fearless curiosity. "Are you the gentleman from the great house?" in a manner of speaking. Mrs. Kedge said a duke was coming, but I thought dukes would be taller. Behind him, someone choked softly. Valentine would once have found a way to answer with cool amusement. Now he could only look at the child's eyes. I shall endeavor to improve. The boy grinned. It struck like light through a locked room. Then Elspeth was there. She did not hurry. That was Elspeth still. Even alarm came to her wearing dignity. Aunt Matilda stood several paces behind, watchful as a drawn curtain. Elspeth's gaze fell first to the bell in Valentine's hand, then to his face. "Nicky," she said, "come here, please." The boy obeyed at once, but he did not hide behind her skirts. He stood beside her, shoulder against her hip, confident in belonging. Valentine envied a child. "Lady Elspeth," he said. The title slipped out before caution could shape it. A few nearby women turned. Elspeth's mouth tightened by the smallest degree. "Mrs. Staveley, Your Grace, in Devon." The correction was soft, but it drew a boundary as cleanly as a locked gate. He bowed. "Mrs. Staveley." The boy looked from one adult to the other. "You know Mama." "I did," Valentine said. "A long time ago." "Was she different then?" Elspeth's hand came down lightly upon the boy's shoulder. "Nicky, it's only a question, and not every question belongs to a garden path." Valentine looked at her hand on the child's shoulder, at the protective curve of it, at the way Nicky leaned into it without fear. He remembered the night she vanished, the gloves left behind, the false note with no life in the handwriting. The clock stopped at 11:17. He had searched. Not enough, not rightly, not where she could hear him. "Your bell," he said, and held it out. Elspeth reached for it at the same moment. Their fingers touched over the warm brass. Not even a touch, really. A brief collision of skin and memory. Her hand withdrew as if the bell had burned her. His did not move at all. For one impossible second, the chapel returned, her gloved hand, his mouth at her knuckles. The vow spoken while rain tapped the glass. Then the garden returned, and there was a child between them with his eyes and her courage. Nicky took the bell from Valentine before either adult could decide who should hold it. "Thank you, sir. You are welcome." A woman in a bonnet approached from the refreshment table. One of the local patronesses Valentine had been introduced to and immediately forgotten. "Mrs. Staveley," she said with a smile that carried more curiosity than kindness. "Your little scholar has made an impression on his grace. What a pity the dear boy has no father to present him properly. Such fine manners are often wasted without a gentleman's hand." Elspeth went very still. Valentine saw it. Not fear, readiness. She had heard worse, perhaps for years, and had trained herself not to bleed where anyone could study the stain. Before she could speak, Valentine turned to the patroness. "Madam, no child is fatherless in courtesy." His voice was not loud. It did not need to be. The woman colored. "I meant no offense, Your Grace." "Then you will be relieved not to repeat it." Silence settled over the garden beds. Nicky looked up at him with new interest. Elspeth looked at him too, and for the first time since she had risen from the potting bench, her composure altered. Not softened, questioned, as if she had expected many things from him, but not restraint sharpened into defense of the child before any claim was made. Valentine handed Mrs. Kedge back her bent petition without looking away from Elspeth. "I had not intended to intrude upon your school." "No," she said, "I imagine you had not intended many things. It was deserved." He accepted it with a small inclination of his head. "May I call at Rosecombe Cottage this afternoon?" "With Mrs. Matilda present, of course." Aunt Matilda made a dry sound behind Elspeth. How considerate of scandal after 7 years. Aunt, Elspeth murmured. No, Valentine said. Mrs. Matilda is correct. That moved something in Elspeth's expression again. He had not defended himself. He had not commanded. He had only stood there, a duke with rain-colored eyes and a bell's accusation still ringing in the air. Nicky tugged at Elspeth's glove. Mama, may I show his grace my sea-kale seedlings? He might know if dukes eat sea-kale. Dukes, Elspeth said, with a steadiness that cost her, are not a separate species. Some behave as if they are, Aunt Matilda muttered. Valentine almost smiled. Almost. The boy crouched by his tray and began explaining the seedlings with grave authority. Valentine listened because the child deserved it, but every word came through a roar of impossible arithmetic. Born after May 1851. 6, perhaps. The bell in his hand. Mrs. Staveley. Grey eyes. Elspeth's guarded face. A child before an heir. She had said it without saying it yet. When Nicky ran to fetch a shell he used as a plant marker, Valentine turned to Elspeth. The garden had resumed its movements around them, but a circle of silence remained. How old is the boy, Elspeth? Her gaze did not falter. The wind lifted the edge of her bonnet ribbon. And, for a moment, he saw the woman from the chapel and the woman who had survived him standing in the same face. Old enough, she said, to know when adults are speaking around him. That is not an answer. No. Will you give me one? She looked toward Nicky, who was showing the shell to Mrs. Kedge with delight. The brass lamb bell flashed at his wrist. When Elspeth spoke, her voice was quiet enough that only Valentine could hear. Not here. Those two words entered him like both mercy and sentence. Not denial, not here. Valentine bowed once, as if before a court whose judgment he had not yet earned. Then I will wait where you permit me to wait. Elspeth's eyes returned to his, and the years between them stood full of letters unwritten, letters unanswered, a stopped clock, a false reflection, and a child ringing a bell no father had heard. That, she said, would be a beginning. Rosecombe Cottage had only one parlour, and by late afternoon it seemed too small to contain a duke, a vanished wife, a widowed aunt, and 7 years of unsentenced grief. The room faced the sea road, where gulls rode the wind above hedges, bright with dog rose. But Elspeth had drawn the muslin curtain halfway across the window before Valentine arrived. She did not wish Devon to watch her past enter by the front door. Aunt Matilda sat near the hearth with her knitting untouched in her lap, a black silk sentinel whose silence warned that she had not forgiven anything on anyone's behalf. Nicky had been sent to Mrs. Kedge's kitchen garden with a basket for early peas, though he had protested that dukes might know useful facts about seedlings. Valentine had smiled at the boy then, the barest movement of his mouth, but the smile had vanished when Elspeth closed the parlour door. Now he stood beside the narrow mantel, hat in hand, too tall for the low room, too controlled for the tremor that had passed over his face when Nicky ran down the path with the brass lamb bell flashings at his wrist. Elspeth did not offer tea. Tea belonged to visits. This was not a visit. You asked his age, she said. Yes. Nicholas was born on the 9th of February, 1852. Valentine's hand closed around the brim of his hat. The motion was slight, but Elspeth saw the force of it. He looked at the floorboards for a moment, and she knew he was counting. Men liked arithmetic when feeling threatened to become unmanageable. May 14th, 1851. Wedding night, June, July, August, February. The numbers had always known what society had not. When he looked up, his face had gone very still. Nicholas, he said. You call him Nicky. Children deserve names before titles. Is he my son? Aunt Matilda's knitting needles clicked once. though she had not meant them to. Elspeth felt the old fear rise. Not fear that he would doubt, fear that he would believe and reach, fear that the law, the title, the great house, the servants, the solicitors, the long machinery of Westgrave would move around her child before Nicky had even learned the word father. She placed both hands on the back of the chair before her. It was a plain rush-seat chair, Devon-made, a thing no one would fight over in any will, and its ordinariness steadied her. "He is the son of my husband." The words entered the room and changed it. Valentine shut his eyes, only for a heartbeat. When he opened them, the control had cracked enough for pain to show through. Elspeth. She almost wished he had sounded angry. Anger would have been easier to stand against. "Do not say my name as if it answers everything. It answers nothing. I know that." He took a step, then stopped himself, his gaze dropping to her worn glove where her fingers gripped the chair. 7 years ago, he might have taken that hand to calm her. Today, he did not. The restraint moved through the room like a different kind of touch, one she had not asked for and yet noticed. "I did not know. No. If I had known, that is a road with no end, Your Grace. Do not call me that. It is your title. I was your husband before I was anything else in this room." Elspeth's throat tightened, but she did not yield her posture. "Were you?" The question struck him cleanly. He accepted it. Aunt Matilda's eyes lifted. Outside, Nicky's voice carried faintly from the garden, bright with some discovery, and Valentine turned toward the sound as if every instinct in him had moved before permission. Elspeth saw the exact moment he mastered himself. He did not go to the window. He did not ask to see the boy again. He stood where she had allowed him to stand. That, too, was dangerous. A man who commanded was easy to resist. A man who learned restraint at the edge of love was harder. "You must come to Brackenmere Hall," he said. There it was, the great machine beginning to turn. Elspeth's hands tightened. "Must?" He heard it, but urgency had already taken him. "Sir Wilfrid knows I have found you. Minerva will know by tonight if she does not already. Devon gossip will carry the rest. This cottage is not defensible. It is a home, it is exposed. It has kept my son safe for 6 years. Because those who threatened you did not know where to look." His voice deepened, not with anger, but with fear held too tightly. "They know now. Brackenmere has staff I trust, records, solicitors within reach, rooms enough for Mrs. Matilda, and every protection my name can command." "Your name?" "Yes, and once I enter under your name, what then? Nicky becomes heir before he becomes a child. I become Duchess before I become a woman with a choice. Doors close, servants bow, papers appear. Everyone says it is for our good." Valentine went pale around the mouth. "That is not what I mean. It is what men mean when frightened. They mistake possession for shelter." Aunt Matilda looked down at her knitting, but Elspeth knew she was listening to every word. Valentine set his hat on the mantel with deliberate care, as if his hands needed occupation to keep from reaching for things he had no right to take. "I am frightened," he said. The admission was so quiet that Elspeth felt it before she believed it. "I was frightened when I found your gloves in that chamber. I was frightened when every road turned empty. I was frightened today when a child rang a bell I had ordered for a hope I thought I had forfeited." His gaze returned to her. "But fear does not make me wrong about danger. No, it only makes you wrong about command." A flash of pain crossed his face. "Then come because I ask. You asked after you ordered. Then I ask again." No, the word was not loud. It did not need height. It had roots. Valentine stared at her, and for the first time she saw the Duke meet a boundary he could not purchase outrank or reason aside. Elspeth, Sir Wilfrid is not harmless. I know that better than you. Do you? The question escaped him too sharply. Regret followed at once. Forgive me, I had no right to say that. No, you had not. I have spent 7 years searching through shadows while he stood in rooms smiling. If he helped hide you from me, he did not hide me, she cut in. I hid myself. Because of what you thought you saw. The conservatory glass returned so vividly that for a moment the cottage walls seemed to fill with damp, orange leaves and candlelight. Elspeth looked at him. What I was allowed to see. Valentine went still. The distinction mattered. She saw that he understood before he spoke. Tell me what you saw. No, Elspeth. Not so you may explain it into something tidy. Not yet. For 7 years I have lived with that reflection. If I give it to you now, you will take it apart like one of your clocks and expect the pieces to obey. His eyes darkened at the truth of it. Then, tell me what you need. The question was better. Too late, perhaps, but better. Elspeth moved to the small writing desk and placed her hand briefly over the drawer where the certified copy of her marriage lines lay hidden beneath old seed packets and a pressed sprig of rosemary. He noticed the movement. Of course he did, but he did not ask. I need my son left where he feels safe tonight, she said. I need no carriage ordered in my name. I need no servant of yours entering this house as if Westgrave has already claimed it. I need you not to speak to Nicky of blood, title, inheritance, or fatherhood until I decide he can bear the shape of those words. Valentine bowed his head once. Agreed. And I need you to understand that knowing he may be yours does not make him less mine. The words cost her more than she expected. Valentine's answer came without delay. Nothing could. Silence followed. Not soft, not healed, but changed. He looked again at her worn glove, and for one foolish, treacherous instant, she remembered the chapel, his mouth at her knuckles, the way she had thought tenderness might be a language they could learn together. His hand shifted at his side, then stilled. He would not touch her. She hated him a little for knowing not to. She was grateful for it too. That made the hurt more complicated. A knock sounded at the cottage door. Aunt Matilda rose before either of them could speak. A moment later, she returned with a folded letter on a silverless salver, her expression sharpened to a blade. From London, she said, brought by the postcart and marked urgent. Elspeth recognized the hand before she touched it. Minerva's script had always been pretty enough to make poison look like invitation. Valentine stepped forward, then stopped again. May I? Elspeth picked up the letter herself. No, she broke the seal. The note was brief. My dearest Elspeth, rumours have reached us of a child in Devon, and a gentleman taking interest where he ought to be cautious. I am coming with Sir Wilfrid to prevent a fraud that would injure every innocent name involved. Do try not to run this time. Your affectionate sister, Minerva. The room chilled. Aunt Matilda muttered something uncharitable beneath her breath. Valentine's face lost every trace of uncertainty. She is coming here, so it appears. Then you cannot remain unguarded. Elspeth folded the letter along its original crease, because if she did not do something precise, anger might find her voice before thought did. I will not run because Minerva commands me to stay. I will not move because you command me to flee. Then what will you do? For the first time that afternoon, Elspeth looked not like a woman cornered, but like the woman who had survived a corner, learned the measurements of walls. I will receive my sister in Devon, she said, and I will decide what she is permitted to see. Outside, Nicky laughed in the garden, and the little brass bell answered him once, clear and bright. Valentine heard it. Elspeth saw him hear it. Whatever came next, the sound no longer belonged to the past alone. Lady Minerva Staveley arrived in Devon as though the county had been waiting for the honour of being judged by her gloves. Her carriage drew up before Mrs. Aveling's rented assembly parlour near the sea road just as the patroness luncheon began. All polished wheels, pale horses, and curtains drawn back at precisely the moment most likely to be observed. Sir Wilfrid Prowse descended first, neat as a legal objection, his silver-topped cane striking the gravel once before he turned to assist her. Minerva stepped down in a travelling dress of soft lilac silk trimmed with black braid, a costume that suggested injury without the inconvenience of mourning anyone in particular. The Devon ladies gathered beneath the striped awning fell into that delicate silence provincial society reserved for London, scandal when it had not yet decided whether to condemn or imitate it. Elspeth saw her sister from across the lawn and felt, with a strange calm, that 7 years had altered almost nothing that mattered. Minerva was still beautiful in a way that seemed practiced before mirrors and sharpened before rivals. Sir Wilfrid still watched rooms as if every person in them were an unsigned paper he might yet use. What had changed was Elspeth's own hand resting lightly on Nicky's shoulder. The boy stood beside a table of seedling pots, his brass lamb bell tied to his wooden hoop with the faded blue ribbon, his hair refusing the comb Aunt Matilda had used on him that morning. He had wanted to bring 3 sea-kale seedlings to the luncheon, because Mrs. Aveling had promised that charitable ladies liked evidence of improvement. Elspeth had allowed it because she would not teach him to hide, simply because cruel adults travelled faster than decency. Valentine stood a few paces away near the refreshment table, speaking to the local rector with a composure so complete that only Elspeth, who had once seen his hand tremble over her abandoned gloves, could detect the alertness beneath it. He had not come to Rosecombe Cottage uninvited that morning. He had sent a note asking where she wished him to stand. That single courtesy had unsettled her more than an order would have done. Now, as Minerva crossed the lawn, Valentine's gaze moved first to Elspeth, not to her sister. He asked a question without words. "Shall I come nearer?" Elspeth did not nod. She only shifted Nicky's seed tray to the left, making space at her side. Valentine understood. He came to stand there, not before her, not behind her, beside. Minerva noticed the movement. Her smile did not falter, but its sweetness thinned. "Elspeth," she said, extending both hands as if they had parted after a mild disagreement over a bonnet. "How altered you are." "Devon air is plain," Elspeth replied. "It has the virtue of honesty." A few ladies looked down at their plates. Sir Wilfrid made a soft, reproving sound. "My dear Lady Elspeth, surely we need not begin with sharpness. We have come in concern." Valentine's voice cut in, level and quiet. "Concern usually asks permission before it arrives." Sir Wilfrid bowed. "Your Grace, I had not expected to find you quite so established here." "Then your information is imperfect." Minerva's eyes flickered, only once. Then she turned to Nicky with the graceful cruelty of someone bending toward a flower she meant to snap. "And this must be the child we have heard so much about." Nicky looked up at her. He was not intimidated by beauty. He had grown up among wind-bent roses and widows who told the truth. "I am Nicholas, but Mama calls me Nicky." "How charming." Minerva's gaze moved over his face, lingering at the eyes. "And how very useful, too." Elspeth's fingers tightened on the edge of the seed tray. Valentine saw it. He did not speak yet. Useful for carrying seedlings, Nicky asked. Mama says usefulness is good if people don't make you small with it. The silence that followed was not large, but it was sharp. Aunt Matilda, seated near the lemon syllabub, made no attempt to hide her satisfaction. Minerva gave a light laugh. Your mama has taught you phrases beyond your years. She teaches me plants, and perhaps appearances. Elspeth set the seed tray down. If you have come to insult a child, Minerva, you might have saved the horses. Minerva's expression softened into public hurt. You always did mistake concern for insult. Surely you understand how sudden this appears. A child with a certain look, a duke with a generous conscience, a sister who disappeared and returns only when his name may prove valuable. The words moved through the luncheon like a draught under a door. Mrs. Aveling froze with a spoon halfway to a dish of syllabub. The rector's wife glanced at Nicky, then away, ashamed of having looked. Nicky did not understand all of it, but he understood enough to step closer to Elspeth. The brass lamb bell gave a faint note against his hoop. Valentine's face hardened. Lady Minerva, you will not weigh a child like coin. The quiet force of it made every bonnet turn. Minerva's colour rose. I weigh nothing, Your Grace. I merely ask what any responsible family must ask when a pretty borrowed proof is placed before society. My son, Elspeth said, and her voice did not lift, is not evidence. Evidence is what frightened people alter. Sir Wilfrid, who had been reaching for a glass of lemonade, paused. His hand remained suspended for a fraction too long. Elspeth saw it. So did Valentine. The pause was small enough to be dismissed by anyone not trained by survival. But Elspeth had spent 7 years remembering the difference between what was seen and what was arranged to be seen. Sir Wilfrid recovered with a mild smile, an interesting turn of phrase. It came easily. One wonders what you imagine has been altered. Valentine looked at Elspeth again, and she felt the weight of his restraint. He could demand answers. He could invoke his rank. He could slice open the moment with questions about the clock, the note, the lost years. He did none of it. He waited, because she had told him waiting would be a beginning. Elspeth turned fully towards Sir Wilfrid. I imagine very little. I remember more than is convenient. Minerva's smile trembled at the edge. You remember a great many things incorrectly. That was always your gift, turning disappointment into grievance. Elspeth looked at her sister's lilac silk, the careful black braid, the performance of wounded virtue laid over envy like scent over decay. No, she said, my gift was learning not to answer every cruelty because father preferred quiet. Lord Staveley was not present to hear it. That made it easier and sadder. Around them, the luncheon had ceased pretending to be luncheon. Sir Wilfrid set down his glass. This is neither the place nor the manner for family matters. You chose both, Valentine said, when you brought accusation into a charitable gathering. Minerva's eyes flashed. And what would you call this, Your Grace? A reunion? A claim? A lady vanishes for years and returns with a boy who carries a trinket conveniently tied to your sentiment. At the word trinket, Nicky clutched the hoop. Elspeth felt the boy's breath catch. That sound decided her. Not anger, not even pride. The small inward hurt of a child hearing adults turn his comfort into suspicion. She knelt beside him despite the watching ladies, careless for once of whether grass dampened her gown. Nicky, she said softly, what is the bell for? He looked from her to Valentine, then to Minerva, for being heard. And are you required to prove anything to Lady Minerva? No. To Sir Wilfrid? No. To His Grace? Nicky hesitated. Valentine went very still. Elspeth's eyes remained on her son. No, the boy said at last, because she had taught him truth slowly and without fear. Not unless Mama says. Valentine closed his eyes for one brief second, as if the answer wounded and honored him at once. When Elspeth rose, the air had changed. The ladies who had leaned toward scandal leaned back from shame. Sir Wilfrid saw it and changed course. Lady Elspeth, no one wishes to distress the child, but London will not be satisfied with sentimental answers. There are records, dates, movements. A lady travelling in haste invites speculation. Elspeth held his gaze. Then London may learn patience. Minerva took a step nearer, lowering her voice just enough to seem intimate, while ensuring half the lawn could hear. Do try not to run this time. The old words from her letter returned, now sharpened in public. Elspeth felt Valentine move beside her, but he did not interrupt. He was learning. She looked at Minerva and found, to her own surprise, no trembling in herself. I ran once because I believed the people in my father's house had become dangerous to my dignity. I stayed away because my child was safer without their curiosity. If you wish to discuss fraud, begin with the night a clock stopped at 11:17. Sir Wilfrid's face changed. It was gone almost immediately, covered by a laugh. A clock? Yes, Elspeth said. A small thing. Those are often where large lies begin. Valentine's attention sharpened beside her. She had not told him this much in the cottage. She felt him receive the clue, felt his mind move toward it, measure it, hold it, yet he did not seize it from her. Minerva's fan snapped open. How dramatic you have become. No, Elspeth said, only less obedient. Aunt Matilda rose from her chair. An improvement I recommend to every woman present. The rector coughed into his hand. Someone almost laughed. Minerva heard it and stiffened. Sir Wilfrid bowed with enough chill to frost the lemonade. We shall continue this conversation where proper documents may be examined. We shall, Valentine said, and when we do, you will find that I have an excellent memory for minutes. Minerva looked at him then, truly looked, and for the first time since arriving, uncertainty touched her face. The luncheon could not recover after that. Ladies returned to plates they did not taste. The rector's wife praised Nicky's seedlings too warmly. Mrs. Aveling announced more tea with the desperation of a woman sweeping glass beneath a carpet. Elspeth remained steady until Minerva and Sir Wilfrid withdrew toward the carriage. Only then did she realize her fingers were cold. Valentine saw before she could hide them in her glove. Mrs. Staveley, he said, formally enough for every eye and quietly enough for only her to understand. May I escort you to your aunt's carriage? It was the correct thing. Public. Proper. Offered, not taken. His arm extended between them. Dark sleeve, gloved hand, no demand. Elspeth looked at it. 7 years ago, she would have taken a duke's arm and thought herself chosen. Today, she took Valentine's arm because she chose to walk and because he had waited to be permitted. Her fingers rested lightly at his sleeve. His breath altered. Only she heard it. They crossed the lawn together. Nicky skipping ahead with his seedlings and the bell. Behind them, whispers gathered and broke apart. You should know, Valentine said under his breath. I will not let your name be timed by someone else's lie again. Elspeth did not look at him. If she had, the ache in his voice might have found the places she was still trying to guard. Do not make vows you have not yet earned. Then I will earn this one before I make it. That was not an answer she knew how to reject. At the carriage, Nicky turned, eyes bright with confusion and bravery. Mama, why did Lady Minerva look afraid when you mentioned a clock? Elspeth's hand tightened once on Valentine's arm before she released him. The question hung between all three of them. This time, the silence did not belong to Minerva. It belonged to the truth, waiting to be wound. By the next morning, Rosecombe Cottage had acquired the uneasy quiet of a house that knew it was being watched. Elspeth noticed it first in the behavior of the lane. The same fish cart passed twice before noon, though no fishmonger in Devon had ever found profit in circling a widow's cottage for sport. A man in a brown coat paused too long near the garden wall and pretended to study the sea, which would have been more convincing had he not kept one eye upon the kitchen door. Aunt Matilda saw him, too, and laid her knitting aside with the air of a woman considering whether age excused impropriety or merely made it more efficient. Sir Wilfrid's creature, she said, or Minerva's. Elspeth stood at the small writing desk, sorting seed packets into careful stacks, because her hands required occupation and because fear, when allowed to wander, became more dangerous than fact. There is often little difference. Nicky was in the back garden with Mrs. Kedge, counting beanpoles and ringing his brass lamb bell only when a task was complete, a rule he had invented after the luncheon, as if order might keep adult cruelty at bay. Each note reached the parlor faintly, bright and innocent. Valentine had sent a message after breakfast. Not a command, not a carriage, not a servant at the door. A folded note in his own hand had arrived by the rector's boy. If you will permit it, I have letters you ought to see. I shall come at the hour you name, with no expectation beyond your leave. V.M. Elspeth had stared at that final line longer than she wished. V.M., the same initials had signed the note, tucked beneath the ribbon of the bell box 7 years ago, for the nursery we are not obliged to speak of yet, but which I have found myself imagining. The woman she had been might have read tenderness and surrendered judgment. The woman she had become answered with 2 words: 3 o'clock. When Valentine arrived, Aunt Matilda admitted him and remained in the room. He bowed to her first, then to Elspeth, and placed a leather portfolio on the table between them with the care of a man laying down something breakable. He looked as though he had not slept. That should not have moved her. It did. The hollows beneath his eyes were slight, but she remembered the disciplined vanity of Mayfair gentlemen, the way men of rank used grooming as armor. Valentine's armor had not cracked in public. It had thinned in private, and she disliked herself for noticing. Mrs. Staveley, he said. Your Grace, his mouth tightened. Not in anger, in pain accepted because it was earned. Aunt Matilda drew her chair closer to the window, close enough to chaperone, and far enough to refuse performance. Show her the papers before either of you begins speaking like a church monument. Valentine opened the portfolio. Inside lay a bundle of letters tied in black ribbon, each bearing his seal, some creased from travel, some returned with marks from post houses. Elspeth did not recognize. The sight of them made the parlor tilt. She had imagined many things in 7 years. His indifference, his shame, his choice of silence, because silence was easier than defending the woman who had fled. She had not imagined a stack. Valentine did not push them toward her. He turned the first so she could see the direction. Lady Elspeth Marlowe, care of Mrs. Matilda Haverstock, Devonshire. The name struck her like a hand laid gently where a wound had never healed. Marlowe. I wrote first to Exeter, he said, then to every Matilda Haverstock I could locate in parish directories, household listings, and through my solicitor's inquiries. This one returned from Honiton, this from Taunton, this from a posting inn near Axminster. This one was never returned, only marked undeliverable by a hand I did not know. Elspeth did not touch the letters. I received none. I know that now. You did not know it then? No. Then what did you know? He looked at her, and something in his face abandoned defense before it could begin. That you were gone. That a note in a hand resembling yours told me not to follow. That your father called your departure hysteria, and Sir Wilfrid called restraint wisdom. That Minerva wept whenever witnesses entered the room. That the conservatory clock had been removed for repair before I could question the man who kept it. Elspeth's head lifted. Removed the morning after you left. Sir Wilfrid claimed the mechanism had failed during the gathering and that your father wanted it out of sight. When my man asked after it, the clock had already been sent to a workshop no one could name. Aunt Matilda gave a low, humorless laugh. A convenient clock. Yes, Valentine said. I have learned to distrust convenience. Elspeth's mind moved to the stopped minute, to Sir Wilfrid's pause at the luncheon when she mentioned altered evidence. You said there was a household clock book at Brackenmere and Westgrave House. Every formal clock is logged when wound or repaired. My family has always been absurd about time. For the first time, a faint self-reproach touched his mouth. I used to consider it a virtue. And the conservatory clock? It should have had an entry for that night. When I requested the book in the weeks after you left, I was told the relevant London pages had been mislaid during the spring move to Hampshire. Told by whom? Sir Wilfrid first, then your father, with less imagination. Elspeth drew one slow breath. He had no authority over Westgrave records. No, but he had proximity to Staveley House records, and for those first days I was searching roads, not ledgers. The admission did not ask pity. That made it harder to dismiss. He took a second bundle from the portfolio, smaller and tied with blue thread. These are copies. The originals remain with my solicitor. I had them made in case you would not wish to hold anything I had handled too often. Aunt Matilda looked briefly at the ceiling, as if asking Providence whether all dukes were this difficult when attempting decency. Elspeth almost smiled. She did not. Valentine continued. I do not offer these as absolution. They prove only that I wrote. They do not prove that I wrote well, soon enough, or with the courage you were owed. The room altered around those words, not softened, cleared. Elspeth sat because standing had begun to require too much pride. I wrote once, she said. Valentine went utterly still. Even Aunt Matilda's knitting needles ceased their faint motion. When? His voice was barely above breath. July. July, he repeated. It was not a question. It was calculation colliding with grief. Elspeth kept her gaze on the letters because his face had become too difficult. I knew by then that I carried a child, not merely suspected. Knew. Aunt Matilda helped me write because my hand would not stop shaking. I sent it through the post at Sidmouth under seal, directed to Westgrave House. Valentine's fingers curled against the table edge. I never received it. No answer came. Elspeth, do not make my name an apology yet. He shut his mouth at once. The obedience was small. It mattered. Outside, the bell rang once. Nicky had completed another beanpole. The sound passed through all three adults like a witness too young to lie. Valentine looked toward the garden, then back to Elspeth. What did the letter say? Enough. That you were with child? Yes. His face changed. Elspeth had thought she understood male grief. She had seen anger, pride, self-pity, and wounded vanity dressed as sorrow. This was none of them. Valentine looked as though a door had opened inside him and shown not an empty room, but a nursery prepared and abandoned by mistake. I mistook absence for answer, he said, each word slow, stripped of ornament, because it spared me from naming my failure. If I believed you chose silence, then I could be injured. If I believed you were unheard, then I had to be guilty." Elspeth looked at him then. She could not help it. The confession did not heal the years. It did not return the first cry he had missed, or the nights she had sat awake with a feverish infant while rain beat against rose-comb windows, or the careful lies she had told kind neighbors who asked whether the boy's father was dead. But it entered the room honestly. That was new. "You were not the only one deceived," she said. "No, and not the only one responsible. No." His readiness to accept the word unsettled her more than argument would have done. He reached toward the letters, then stopped before his hand crossed the center of the table. "May I leave these with you?" She studied the space between his hand and hers. No touch, no insistence, only evidence waiting to be received. "Copies," she said, "not originals, copies." "And Nicky?" The question surprised him. "What of him? You asked to know him." His breath shifted. "I did. You may speak with him in the garden for half an hour after tea. Aunt Matilda or I will be present. You will not tell him what you suspect. You will not ask him to call you anything. You will not give him gifts." "No gifts," he agreed, though his eyes moved toward the sound of the bell with an ache he did not hide quickly enough. "No claims. Not before he knows you. Not before you permit it. Do not make me sovereign where you mean to be patient only until evidence gives you power." His gaze returned to hers. "Then not before he is safe enough to hear truth without being used by it." Elspeth looked down at the blue-tied bundle. "Better." Aunt Matilda resumed knitting with one decisive click. "Progress. Astonishing, but there it is." A reluctant breath moved through the room, not laughter, but the memory of its possibility. Then a shadow crossed the window. Elspeth turned. The man in the brown coat stood beyond the low wall, pretending to adjust his boot while facing the cottage door. Valentine saw him at the same moment. His expression did not change. That was how she knew danger had entered his blood. "Do you know him?" he asked. "No." Aunt Matilda set down her knitting. "He has passed twice." Valentine rose, but he did not go to the door without looking to Elspeth first. "I can have my groom remain on the lane." Discreetly. "He will take no instruction regarding your household except to watch who approaches." The old instinct in her wanted to refuse anything that smelled of Westgrave protection. But the man beyond the wall had Minerva's rival written all over him, and Nicky was in the garden. "One groom," she said, "on the lane, not at my door." Agreed. "He speaks to Aunt Matilda if there is danger." Agreed. "Not to Nicky." Agreed. The ease of his answers frightened her because it made room for trust. Valentine gathered his hat, leaving the copied letters on the table. Before he turned, his gaze fell to one envelope, the one marked undeliverable by a heavy black seal impression smudged along the fold. His hand hovered over it. "This mark," he said. Elspeth leaned closer despite herself. The seal was not clear, only a broken curve and a diagonal line pressed into wax that had once been softened again. Aunt Matilda rose and came to see. Valentine's voice lowered. "Sir Wilfrid uses a seal with a diagonal spur beneath the prow's crest. I have seen it on debt correspondence." Elspeth felt the room narrow around the envelope. "Then one of your letters passed through his hands, or more than one." Outside, Nicky's bell rang again, and this time the note sounded less like play than warning. Valentine looked toward the lane where the watcher had begun to walk away. "Mrs. Staveley," he said, carefully, publicly, because Aunt Matilda stood there and because Elspeth had made rules he was honoring. "We have been searching for a vanished wife. I begin to think we should have been searching for a stolen road between husband and wife." Elspeth touched the edge of the copied letter. She did not forgive him. She did not move toward him. But for the first time in 7 years, silence no longer seemed like something he had chosen alone. "Then find the road," she said. "Do not drag me down it." He bowed his head. "No, I will ask where you wish to step." The Devon Botanical Society held its children's charity exhibition in a long white marquee pitched beside the assembly garden, where the sea wind worried the guy. Ropes and every table smelled of damp soil, cut stems, and reputations waiting to be improved. Elspeth had almost refused the invitation. After Minerva's luncheon, every friendly face in the county had become uncertain, not because kindness had vanished, but because curiosity traveled faster than conscience. Yet Nicky had spent 3 weeks coaxing his seedlings into order, painting labels in his careful, uneven hand, and asking whether poor soil could still grow strong plants if someone paid attention before it was too late. Elspeth could not teach him courage by hiding his work under the kitchen table, so she came in a plain grey gown with Aunt Matilda. At her side, Nicky's seed trays arranged upon a green baize table and the small brass lamb bell tied to his wooden hoop by its faded blue ribbon. Valentine arrived separately, as she had requested, without procession and without ducal display, beyond the quiet impossibility of being himself. He paused at the entrance, found her across the crowded marquee, and did not come nearer until she inclined her head. That small obedience steadied her more than she wanted to admit. He had kept 1 groom on the lane after the watcher appeared. He had sent no carriage to command her. He had spoken with Nicky twice in the garden, always with Aunt Matilda or Elspeth present, and he had not once asked the child a question that carried blood, title, or claim inside it. Nicky, for his part, had decided His Grace knew very little about radishes, but possessed a useful ability to listen. "Mama," Nicky whispered, arranging a pot of sea kale beside a row of bean. "Seedlings, if the ladies ask whether my bell is part of the exhibit, may I say it is for completion?" "Completion of what?" Elspeth asked. "Trastesques. I ring it when something is properly done." Aunt Matilda, seated behind the table like a judge in black bombazine, murmured, "A custom parliament might profit from." Nicky grinned, then straightened as Mrs. Aveling approached with 2 patronesses and the rector's wife. Compliments were made. Small coins were promised for the charity subscription. For half an hour, the day almost behaved. Children showed pressed leaves. Widows sold lavender sachets. Valentine spoke to the rector near the entrance, but his gaze returned often to Elspeth, not with ownership, but with the attentive restraint of a man waiting for the hour she had permitted him to enter. Then Minerva arrived. This time she wore pale rose muslin, a color chosen to suggest innocence refreshed after insult. Sir Wilfrid Prowse followed with a leather document case beneath one arm. The sight of that case turned the air in Elspeth's lungs sharp. Valentine saw it from across the marquee. His first instinct was visible only because she had begun to know the difference between movement and restraint. He shifted as if to cross to her at once. Then he stopped and looked at her. Elspeth placed one hand lightly on the edge of Nicky's table. "Wait," he waited. Minerva greeted 3 ladies before she greeted her sister, ensuring the room saw her composure and Elspeth's silence. At last, she came to the seedling table, smiling down at Nicky's labels. "How industrious," she said. "One would almost think the little gentleman had been trained for display." Nicky looked puzzled. "Seedlings are displayed so people can see if they are growing well." Just so, Minerva's fan opened. Some things are displayed for persuasion. Elspeth felt Nicky lean closer to her skirt. "Lady Minerva," she said, "if you wish to admire the children's work, you may. If you wish to practice cruelty, I recommend a mirror. It has always been your most faithful audience." A faint gasp passed through the nearest ladies. Minerva's eyes hardened, though her smile remained. Sir Wilfrid stepped forward with his smooth, sorrowful expression. "This is precisely why responsible intervention is required. No one wishes to distress a child, but a claim affecting one of England's oldest dukedoms cannot be left to sentiment, seedlings, and a convenient resemblance." Valentine crossed the marquee then. He did not hurry, but every conversation died as he approached. "Choose your next words carefully, Sir Wilfrid." "I always do, Your Grace." Sir Wilfrid opened the leather case and withdrew a small pasteboard token, discoloured at one edge and stamped with a railway cloakroom number. "This came into my possession only yesterday. It suggests that during Lady Elspeth's flight in May of 1851, she deposited luggage under another name at a railway cloakroom and was seen in the company of a gentleman not related to her. The date, naturally, raises questions." The room went silent, not the living silence that follows awe, the other kind, the silence that feeds. Elspeth stared at the token. She had never seen it. She had travelled by hired carriage with Aunt Matilda, through coaching inns, not under a false gentleman's escort. Yet the token sat in Sir Wilfrid's gloved hand with the ugly confidence of planted proof. Nicky's face had gone pale. He understood little of railways and nothing of ducal inheritance, but he knew when adults were placing his mother in danger. The brass lamb bell rang once. He had not meant to ring it. His fingers had clenched around the hoop. The sound cut through the marquee, bright and small and unbearable. Valentine moved half a step, anger burning cold across his face, but Elspeth lifted her hand. "Not much. Enough. Let me." He stopped. She felt the entire room notice that the Duke of Westgrave had obeyed her. That gave her voice ground beneath it. "If I meant to sell a lie," she said, looking first at Sir Wilfrid, then at every patroness who had leaned toward the scandal, "why did I hide from the richest man in England for 7 years?" No one answered. The question stood among the seed trays and made the token look smaller. Minerva recovered first. "Guilt often hides." "So does safety," Elspeth replied. "A woman who has seen her own family arrange a scene for her humiliation learns the difference." Sir Wilfrid's face remained composed, but his eyes sharpened. Arrange? That is a serious word. So is fraud. He smiled thinly. "You use it easily for a lady with no documents in her hand." Valentine spoke then, clear enough for the back of the marquee. "Lady Elspeth speaks as my wife." A sound moved through the room like wind through paper. Mrs. Aveling gripped the back of a chair. The rector's wife pressed one hand to her lips. Minerva's fan stopped. Elspeth did not look at Valentine at once. If she did, she feared the force of those words, delayed by 7 years, and spoken now before all the wrong people, might undo the careful architecture of her dignity. "My wife." This time he had said it, not under my protection, not in private, not as a possession, as truth. Sir Wilfrid's smile chilled. "Your Grace may regret such generosity." "It is not generosity to name what is legal." "Then, perhaps documents should be produced." "They will be." Valentine's gaze moved to the token, as will the origin of that object. Minerva gave a brittle laugh. How noble. A duke discovers a pretty boy with familiar eyes and remembers a marriage no one was permitted to witness. Aunt Matilda rose. Age had not softened her voice. "I witnessed enough after the fact to—" No, my niece arrived in Devon alone, sick with grief, and carrying nothing but a lawful paper, a bell, and more courage than all of you have managed to gather beneath this canvas." Nicky looked up. "Mama, am I the question again?" Elspeth's heart clenched. That was the harm. Not the whispers, not the insult. This, a child wondering whether his existence was something adults argued over rather than cherished. She knelt, careless of the damp grass beneath the matting. "No, darling, you are not the question." His fingers tightened around the bell. "Then what is?" She looked up at Sir Wilfrid. "The question is, who keeps producing answers before anyone asks honestly?" Valentine's expression changed with a fierce, quiet pride that frightened her in its tenderness. He did not rescue her from the moment. He stood beside it with her. Sir Wilfrid returned the token to his case. "We shall see how well such poetry fares before London witnesses." "We shall," Valentine said, "and we shall begin with the hour of 11:17. Minerva's face flickered. It was only the smallest fracture, but Elspeth saw it, and knew Valentine did too. The clock had entered the room without a clock being present. Sir Wilfrid bowed to the patronesses, pretending dignity where retreat had begun. Minerva followed him, pale rose muslin, trembling at the hem. The exhibition did not recover. It ended in murmurs, overpraised seedlings and women avoiding Elspeth's eyes until Valentine offered her a public bow that forced them to remember courtesy. When the carriage came for Rosecombe, Elspeth's strength had thinned to a thread. Nicky climbed in beside Aunt Matilda, exhausted and clutching his hoop. Valentine stood at the open carriage door. The lane was crowded enough to make every gesture matter. He did not touch her. He only turned his gloved hand palm upward in the shadow of the carriage step, where no one could mistake it for possession, and no one could quite call it indifference. "May I help you up?" he asked. The formality saved her from too much feeling. Elspeth placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, steady and warm. It should have ended when she stepped inside. It did not. He sat opposite only after Aunt Matilda's dry nod allowed it, and when the carriage moved, his hand remained open between them, not reaching, not demanding. The road jolted. Elspeth's hand, resting on the seat, shifted toward his. He did not take it. He waited. At last, with Nicky drowsing against Aunt Matilda and the bell quiet in his lap, Elspeth placed her hand in Valentine's again. This time, no one spoke. He held her as if holding was a promise with conditions, and she let him because the day had shaken her, because he had said wife before witnesses, because he had stopped when she asked him to stop, and because for the first time in 7 years, the silence between them did not feel like abandonment. After several minutes, he said, "I will not hide you to spare myself scandal." She looked at their joined hands. "Do not make me grateful for what should have happened years ago." "I will not." His thumb did not move over her glove. He held still. "I will make it right before I ask you for anything tender." Outside, the sea road bent toward Rosecombe. Inside, Elspeth did not withdraw her hand. That was not forgiveness. It was not trust entire, but it was the first bridge laid across a stolen road. Somewhere behind them, though neither could hear it, Sir Wilfrid leaned close to Minerva in a hired carriage and said, "Then we destroy the clockmaker's original notation before Westgrave finds it." Brackenmere Hall received Elspeth without surprise, and that nearly broke her. She had prepared herself for grandeur. She had prepared herself for footmen in Marlow livery, for ancestral stone, for the long avenue of beeches that made any carriage feel as though it approached judgment rather than shelter. She had even prepared herself for the first sight of the house, its pale Hampshire front rising beyond the lawns with all the calm authority of a family that had never once needed to explain why it belonged where it stood. What she had not prepared for was the housekeeper, waiting at the door with tears standing in her eyes and no astonishment in her curtsy. Mrs. Annis Vale had aged in 7 years, but not softened. Her black gown was immaculate, her cap severe, and her hands trembled only when Nicky climbed down from the carriage holding his hoop and the little brass lamb bell. "Your Grace, Mrs." Vale said to Elspeth, and the words landed in the gravel yard like something returned from burial. Nicky looked up at his mother. "Is she speaking to you?" Elspeth felt Aunt Matilda's gaze sharpen beside her. Valentine stood a few paces away, having ridden ahead only after asking whether she wished the household warned or left unprepared. She had chosen warning. She had not expected reverence. "Mrs. Vale," Elspeth said, because she could not yet answer Nicky with a title in her mouth. "You remember me. Every day, Your Grace." Valentine's face altered at that. He had not known either. Good. Let the house reveal some truths without his command. Mrs. Vale recovered herself and turned to the child with a gentleness that respected rather than seized him. "And you must be Master Nicholas." "Nicky," he said, "unless I have done something formal." Aunt Matilda made a strangled sound that might have been laughter. Mrs. Vale's eyes filled further. "Then Nicky, if your mamma permits." "She does," Elspeth said. "For now." The phrase reminded everyone where the boundary lay. Valentine did not cross it. He ordered no embrace of welcome, no household display, no immediate announcement to tenants. He simply said, "Mrs. Vale, the blue rooms for Mrs. Matilda, the east nursery rooms opened but not forced upon anyone, and no servant is to speak of inheritance to the boy." "Yes, Your Grace." Elspeth looked at him sharply. He met her gaze. "I listened." The words were low enough that Nicky, already staring up at the carved stone wolves over the doorway, did not hear. Elspeth should have answered with caution. Instead, something quieter moved through her. Not trust, recognition of an attempt. "Continue doing so," she said. They entered Brackenmere as visitors, though every polished floor and painted ancestor insisted otherwise. Nicky forgot his shyness by the second portrait. The Marlowe men watched him from gilded frames with grey eyes, long noses, and expressions of dynastic fatigue. At the third landing, he stopped beneath a portrait of a boy in a dark velvet suit holding a wooden horse. "That one looks cross," he said. Valentine replied, "Was my grandfather at 7. He was told to stand still for 6 hours. No wonder he looks cross." Indeed, the exchange was small, but Elspeth felt its ache. Valentine did not tell Nicky the boy in the portrait was blood. He did not say, "You have his eyes." He offered a fact a child could hold without being held by it. That was more restraint than most men of rank ever learned. They reached the nursery corridor after luncheon because Nicky had asked where the small empty hook for his bell might be, and Valentine had gone very still before saying it was upstairs if Elspeth wished to see it. She had almost refused. Aunt Matilda, who had made a life of knowing when courage needed a shove and when it needed tea, said, "We have come this far. Let the room answer what it can." The east nursery opened with a key Mrs. Vale carried at her waist. Dust sheets had been removed before their arrival, but the room still held the hush of a place preserved rather than used. Sunlight rested on pale curtains. A small bookcase stood ready with alphabet primers and picture books that had never been thumbed by jam-sticky fingers. Near the window sat a cradle of satinwood, simple and finely made. Above it, fixed into the carved rail, was a tiny brass hook. Empty. Nicky walked to it slowly. The bell at his hoop gave a faint sound when he lowered it to his side. "Mama," he said, "was that hook waiting for my bell?" The question pierced every adult in the room. Valentine turned away, but not before Elspeth saw the effort pass through his face. Mrs. Vale pressed one hand to her apron. Aunt Matilda's expression hardened against tears. Elspeth crossed to the cradle and laid her gloved hand on one side of the rail. "Perhaps it was," she said, "but you were not late to it. Rooms can wait. Children should not have to." Nicky considered that seriously. "May I try it?" Elspeth looked to Valentine, then stopped herself. No, not permission from the house. From her son's safety. "Yes," she said, gently. Nicky untied the brass lamb bell from his hoop and slipped the ribbon over the hook. It hung there as though made for nothing else. Of course, it had been made for nothing else. Valentine stood on the opposite side of the cradle, his hand resting on the rail across from Elspeth's. Their fingers did not touch. The cradle lay between them like the years themselves, polished, empty, waiting for what had already grown beyond it. "I ordered the room opened the week before we married," he said. His voice was controlled, but not cold. "Not because duty required a child, because I found myself imagining one with you and could not stop." Elspeth looked down at the bell. "You did not know I was carrying him?" "No." "Then why?" He looked at her across the cradle. "Because hope is not always obedient to evidence." That should have sounded like a duke's polished answer. It did not. It sounded like a confession he had not meant to make in front of a cradle and a child. Elspeth's hand tightened on the wood. For a moment, she saw the life that had nearly happened. A nursery bell, a husband's step in the corridor. A child heard before he cried too long. The vision was cruel because it was gentle. Nicky, unaware of all that moved above him, reached up and rang the bell once. The sound was small, clear, and complete. "It sounds different here," he said. Aunt Matilda answered because Elspeth could not. "Rooms change sounds. Do people?" Nicky asked. The silence that followed was too honest. Valentine looked at Elspeth, not at the child. "They can," he said, "if they learn what harm their old sounds carried." Nicky accepted this as he accepted most adult statements, storing it for later without surrendering his present interest. "May I see the gardens?" Mrs. Vale seized the mercy of movement. "I know where the kitchen gardeners keep currant bushes, Master Nicky." He looked to Elspeth. She nodded. "Stay with Mrs. Vale and your great-aunt. You won't go away." The question was quick, almost hidden beneath boyish haste. Elspeth knelt and straightened his collar. "No, I shall be here." He glanced at Valentine. "Will His Grace go away?" Valentine's answer came softly. "Not while your mamma permits me to remain." Nicky seemed satisfied. When he left with Aunt Matilda and Mrs. Vale, the bell remained on the hook. Elspeth noticed at once. Valentine did too. Neither moved to take it down. For the first time in 7 years, the brass lamb bell was in the place intended for it, and that fact unsettled the air more than any accusation could have. "I should show you the clock book," Valentine said after a moment. Yes, practical words saved them. They descended to the muniment room, where estate maps, ledgers, correspondence books, and household records sat in oak presses. Caleb Thorne awaited them, older, leaner, and visibly shaken when he bowed to Elspeth as Duchess. He had witnessed the chapel marriage. He did not say so before she asked him to. Good man, better memory. Valentine unlocked a long drawer and removed the Westgrave household clockbook, bound in brown leather with brass corners rubbed smooth by years of use. The London house records were transferred here after my mother's death, he said. The volume for 1851 should contain the conservatory entry. Caleb opened it to May. The pages smelled of dust and iron gall ink. Neat columns recorded room, clock, winding hour, repair notes and signature. Elspeth bent closer. Her botanical notebooks had trained her eye for differences in ink, pressure, and spacing. Plant labels betrayed careless hands. So did ledgers. The line for Staveley House Conservatory, the 15th of May 1851, was present, but the minute had been scraped thin. Someone had altered the entry. Beneath the newer ink, a ghost of the original remained, not readable, but wounded. Valentine's jaw tightened. It has been changed. Elspeth touched nothing, not recently. Caleb leaned in. No, Your Grace, the scrape is old. See how the paper has darkened again at the fibres. Valentine looked at Elspeth. Sir Wilfrid said the pages were mislaid. Perhaps they were, she said, after they had been taught to lie. The words hung in the muniment room. Valentine closed the book, then stopped himself and opened it again, as if denying the evidence, the darkness of shut covers. I will have Caleb guard this room. Guard records, not me. Yes. He accepted the correction immediately. The records. Caleb cleared his throat. Your Grace, there may be another source, Mr. Venn, the London clockmaker who tended the Staveley automaton, died 3 years ago, but I heard his apprentice settled near Winchester. Abel Knorr, if memory serves. Apprentices often kept service slips when masters refused wages. Elspeth felt the story shift beneath her feet. Not healed, not safe, but moving. Valentine turned to her, and this time he did not decide aloud. Do you wish to pursue him? He asked. She looked at the scratched page, then toward the ceiling, where somewhere above them the little brass bell hung over an empty cradle and a living child explored a garden not yet his. Yes, she said, but not behind closed doors. I go where my truth goes. Valentine bowed his head. Then we go together with Mrs. Matilda, and at your pace. For one dangerous instant, the muniment room seemed warmer than before. Elspeth did not thank him. Gratitude would have been too easy and too small. Instead, she placed one finger beside the altered minute, careful not to touch the ink. 7 years ago, someone stopped a clock and expected my life to stop with it. Valentine's eyes held hers across the ledger. It did not. No, she said. It learned to keep time without permission. Somewhere above, the bell rang once. Whether moved by Nicky's hand or a draught through the nursery window, Elspeth could not know. This time, no one mistook it for a warning. It was a summons. The road to Winchester ran beneath a pale summer sky that made every field look innocent, and Elspeth found herself distrusting beauty more than rain. She sat in Valentine's travelling carriage with Aunt Matilda opposite, Caleb Thorne riding ahead, and a Westgrave groom behind. Not as a guard upon her person, Valentine had been careful to say, but as protection for the evidence they hoped find. Nicky had remained at Brackenmere Hall with Mrs. Vale after extracting solemn promises from all adults that the brass lamb bell would not be moved from the nursery hook unless he moved it himself. Elspeth had hesitated at leaving him even for a day, but Nicky had looked up from his seed trays and said, with the fierce logic of 6 years, "If you find the clockman, Mama, perhaps the bad minute will stop being bad." That had settled it. Now she watched hedgerows slip past and tried not to think of the small certificate copy, hidden in her sewing case beneath old seed packets, tucked inside the drawer of the room Mrs. Vale had given her. Valentine had asked whether she wished the paper placed in the muniment room with the clock book. She had said no. He had not argued. That, too, unsettled her. In the carriage, he sat beside the opposite window, close enough that she could see the faint strain at his mouth whenever the wheels jolted, far enough that no one could accuse him of forgetting Aunt Matilda's presence or Elspeth's boundaries. He held the copied clock entry in one hand and a list of Winchester clockmakers in the other, but his attention returned to her more often than to either. "You are thinking of the certificate," he said at last. Aunt Matilda's eyes opened. She had not been asleep. She never was when useful discomfort could be observed. Elspeth looked at Valentine. "You have learned to ask less and notice more. I am trying to learn which is which, and which is this," a noticed fear. "Not a question unless you wish to answer it." The answer should have been nothing. Instead, the truth rose because he had not demanded it. "If that paper is taken, people will say the marriage was memory, not law. They will say I invented a wedding to explain a child." Valentine folded the list slowly. Mrs. Vale and Caleb witnessed the marriage. Servants and stewards can be called loyal. A woman in scandal is called inventive. You know this. His face tightened. "Yes. Do you? I know it now with shame." The carriage rolled into a patch of shade. For a moment, the light over his face softened, and Elspeth saw not the Duke who had once stood beneath gilded chandeliers, but the man in the chapel who had looked at her hand as if it were something entrusted to him, not acquired. She turned away before memory made her foolish. "Let us find Mr. Knorr," she said. Abel Knorr lived above a narrow shop smelling of oil, brass filings, and old wood. He was younger than Elspeth expected, not yet 40, with a stoop acquired from peering into mechanisms and a nervous habit of wiping his fingers on a cloth already dark with work. At first, he denied remembering the Staveley conservatory clock. Then Valentine set the copied entry on the counter, and Elspeth placed beside it her botanical notebook open to a page of plant labels from 1851, each annotated in her own precise hand. Abel stared at the two papers, ledger and notebook, as if truth had approached him from both sides. "Mr. Knorr," Elspeth said, "I do not ask you to serve a duke. I ask you to remember whether a clock was made to lie." The man's eyes flicked to Valentine, then back to her. "I was apprentice to Mr. Venn then. I only carried tools." "But you carried memory too," Aunt Matilda said from near the door. "Most apprentices do. It is cheaper than wages." Abel gave a broken little laugh, then opened a drawer with a key on a chain. From beneath springs and old invoices, he drew a folded service slip, torn along one side. "I kept it because Master Venn docked my pay after that night. Said I wrote the wrong time on the slip and caused trouble. But I didn't. I wound the Staveley conservatory clock at 42 minutes past 10. It was running clean. When I was called back after midnight, it had been stopped by hand. Not failed. Stopped. The minute was set to 11:17. Elspeth heard the shop clock ticking behind him, too loud, too steady. "Who called you back?" Abel swallowed. "A gentleman. Silver-topped cane. Prowse, I think. He said the family wished the entry corrected to spare a lady distress." Valentine's stillness became dangerous. "And did you correct it?" "Master Venn did. I was told to scrape the book line and hold my tongue. But I kept the slip." He pushed it toward Elspeth, not Valentine. The gesture mattered. The paper showed the date, the winding hour, and Abel's cramped notation. Running clean at 10:42. Elspeth did not touch it at once. 7 years had taught her that proof could wound as sharply as lies, because proof arrived after the wound had already learned to live. "Thank you," she said. Abel lowered his eyes. "I'm sorry, my lady. I thought it was some quarrel between grand people." I didn't think a clock could ruin anyone. Small things are often chosen because people think no one will respect their power. Valentine looked at her then, and something like fierce sorrow moved through his face. He paid Abel for his testimony, but only after Elspeth asked the man whether he would speak before witnesses. Abel agreed, pale but resolute. Caleb took custody of the service slip in a sealed envelope, signed across the flap by Abel, Valentine, Elspeth, and Aunt Matilda. No one spoke much on the road back. The carriage entered Brackenmere Land near dusk, and before it reached the house, Caleb's groom came riding hard from the avenue. Valentine opened the carriage door before the vehicle had fully stopped, but he looked to Elspeth before stepping down. Permission, even under alarm. She nodded once. The groom's message was brief. A stranger had been found near the east rooms, claiming to have lost his way from the servants' hall. Mrs. Vale had caught him at the corridor outside Elspeth's chamber. He had fled, but the footman had seized him near the stable arch. Elspeth did not wait for Valentine's command. She was out of the carriage with Aunt Matilda behind her, walking so quickly that her skirts snapped at her ankles. "Nicky," she said. "Where is Nicky?" "In the nursery, ma'am," the groom said, with Mrs. Vale. That was not enough. She crossed the hall, up the stairs, through the corridor where evening light lay in long bars across the carpet. The nursery door stood open. Nicky sat on the floor amid seed trays, the brass lamb bell hanging above him on the cradle hook. When he saw her, his face lit with relief he had tried to hide. "Mama, I moved your important paper." The world stopped for one clean second. Elspeth knelt before him. "What paper?" "The one in the sewing case. The man had muddy cuffs, and he looked at your drawer. I didn't like him, so when Mrs. Vale took him to the wrong linen cupboard, I put the paper under the broad bean tray. Broad beans are very loyal." Aunt Matilda sank into a chair. Mrs. Vale pressed a hand to her heart. Valentine stood in the doorway, white with controlled fury and something far more tender. Elspeth lifted the nearest seed tray. Beneath it, wrapped in a square of linen, lay the certified copy of her marriage lines, intact, dry, safe. The breath went out of her so suddenly that she swayed. Valentine moved, then stopped himself, as if restraint had become instinct at last. But Elspeth, still kneeling, looked at Nicky's earnest face, at the bell above him, at the paper that named the truth he had protected without fully understanding, and something inside her gave way, not into collapse, into need. She rose and crossed the small space to Valentine. She did not think of Aunt Matilda, Mrs. Vale, or the open nursery door. She reached him first. Her hands touched his coat, then folded against him as she stepped into his arms. He made a sound, almost her name, and held her with careful strength, as if he feared both letting go and holding too tightly. The embrace lasted only a few breaths. It held 7 years. Then he released her first, exactly as a man should when forgiveness had not yet been granted. "He is safe," Valentine said, voice roughened beyond polish. "You are safe." "Because my son distrusted muddy cuffs," Elspeth said, and a shaken laugh trembled through the words. Nicky looked pleased. "And broad beans." "And broad beans," Valentine said, turning to him with grave respect. "I owe them my gratitude." In the hall below, Caleb questioned the captured intruder before the magistrate's man was sent for. The answer came before supper. The thief had been paid by Sir Wilfrid Prowse. No one in the nursery pretended surprise. The brass lamb bell stirred in the evening draught and rang once above the recovered certificate, soft as warning, clear as proof. The gates of Brackenmere Hall closed at 6 o'clock, and Elspeth heard the iron meet iron from the nursery corridor as clearly as if the bars had struck across her own chest. She had been helping Nicky press damp soil around a row of bean seedlings in a wooden tray Mrs. Vale had allowed him to keep near the nursery suo. Because he insisted the broad beans had already proven themselves loyal and deserved honourable quarters. The brass lamb bell hung above the satinwood cradle, its ribbon still tied to the little hook that had waited 7 years. It did not ring when the gates closed. That made the sound worse. Nicky looked up, fingers black with soil. "Mama, was that thunder?" "No," Elspeth said, keeping her voice even. "Only the gates. Why are they shut before dark?" She had no answer that would not put adult fear into a child's hands. Aunt Matilda, seated with her embroidery untouched, looked toward the door with the narrow expression she wore when men mistook decisiveness for wisdom. A moment later, Caleb Thorne appeared at the threshold, his face grave. "His Grace has ordered the outer gates secured. Ma'am, no one is to leave or enter without his permission until the matter of Sir Wilfrid is concluded." Elspeth slowly wiped soil from Nicky's fingers with a cloth. His permission. Caleb had the grace to look uncomfortable. Those were his words, "Ma'am." "Thank you, Mr. Thorne." After he bowed and withdrew, Nicky frowned at the seedlings. "Are we prisoners?" "No," Elspeth said too quickly. He heard the speed, not the reassurance. His small shoulders tightened. She knelt in front of him. "You are safe, but sometimes adults make mistakes when they are frightened." "Did His Grace make one?" Aunt Matilda's needle paused in mid-air. Elspeth looked at the bell above the cradle, the room preserved for hope, the certificate copy, now locked in a temporary writing box beneath her own key after the attempted theft, and the boy who had hidden truth beneath broad beans because he had noticed muddy cuffs when grown men noticed too late. "Yes," she said, "perhaps he has." Valentine was in the library with his solicitor's clerk when Elspeth entered without being announced. She had never done that in any great house before. Her old self would have waited outside until a footman decided she was convenient. The woman who had walked out of Mayfair before dawn did not wait outside locked doors. Valentine stood behind a wide mahogany desk, coat discarded, sleeves immaculately fastened, his face set in that pale, controlled severity she had learned to fear and pity by turns. Papers lay before him. One bore Nicky's full name written in a legal hand, Nicholas Marlowe, lawful issue of Valentine Marlowe, Duke of Westgrave, and Lady Elspeth Staveley, Duchess of Westgrave. Another contained formal language about household protection, guardianship, public acknowledgement, and temporary restriction for safety. The words blurred for a moment, not because she could not read them, because she could. "Leave us," Valentine said to the clerk. The young man gathered his inkstand and escaped with visible relief. When the door closed, Valentine looked at Elspeth and understood at once that she had seen enough. "Sir Wilfrid has tried to steal your marriage lines. He has corrupted a clockmaker's record, planted a false railway token, and placed men on your lane. I will not leave you and the boy open to another move." The boy. Her voice was quiet. "Nicholas," he corrected. When he is frightened, Valentine's jaw tightened. "Elspeth, this is not fear without cause. I know the cause. I object to the remedy. The gates are temporary. So is a locked room to the person holding the key." He came around the desk, then stopped before he crossed too much distance. He had learned that much, and the fact made the next words sadder. "I have drafted acknowledgement papers to secure his position. No one will be able to question him once they are executed." "Executed by whom?" "By me, with your signature as confirmation." My signature after your decision. He looked down at the document, and for the first time seemed to see not its strength, but its order of creation. I meant to protect him. You meant to claim him so quickly that no one could steal him from you. The sentence landed hard. She saw it. Valentine's face did not change much, but something in him flinched. Is that what you think of me? It is what I think of frightened men with power. I am his father. You suspect you are. I know you are. Neither fact gives you leave to build a fortress around us and call the walls love. I have lost 7 years. His voice broke at the edge, not loudly, but enough. 7 years, Elspeth. I heard my child's bell in a garden like a ghost given hands. I watched a thief reach for the only paper that proves I did not abandon my wife-in-law, whatever I failed in courage. Sir Wilfrid will not stop because we ask politely. And if I ask to leave, silence. It was the wrong silence. Not because he said no, but because for 1 second he did not answer at all. Elspeth looked at him through that second and saw the conservatory again. A word delayed, a truth not spoken fast enough. Some seconds became verdicts. There, she said. He closed his eyes. Elspeth. No, do not soften it with my name. She turned before he could speak and went upstairs. She did not run. Running had been Minerva's word for her courage, and she would not borrow it now. In her chamber, she opened the wardrobe and took out the plain travelling dress she had worn from Devon. Aunt Matilda arrived almost immediately, because she had heard enough of life to recognize the sound of a woman being quietly forced to choose herself again. Winchester? Aunt Matilda asked. Your rooms there will do until morning. Yes. Nicky? With us. Elspeth folded one gown, then another. Her hands did not shake until she reached for the writing box. The certificate copy lay inside, safe because Nicky had trusted broad beams more than locks. She placed it at the bottom of her case. I will not let my son learn that safety means waiting for a man to decide whether the door opens. Aunt Matilda's mouth pressed thin. Then we leave before dinner and scandalize the soup. The door opened. Valentine stood there. He had no right to enter her bedchamber without permission, and the knowledge was on his face before she spoke. He remained at the threshold, one hand braced against the frame as if stopping himself from crossing it. I beg your pardon. I should have knocked. Yes, Elspeth said. You should have. He stepped back into the corridor. Then he knocked once, formally, absurdly, painfully. Aunt Matilda muttered, better late than bread without manners. Elspeth did not smile. Enter. Valentine came no farther than the threshold. In his hand was the acknowledgement draft. I have torn up the instruction to keep the gates closed. His voice was steady, only because he forced it to be. Caleb is opening them now. Downstairs, after a moment, iron shifted again in the distance. This time the sound released air Elspeth had not known she held. Valentine lifted the papers. They had been torn in half. I tried to keep you safe. I see now I tried to keep you. The words entered the room stripped of ducal polish. I told myself speed was mercy. I told myself law would defend what tenderness failed to defend 7 years ago. But I made a decision around your name and around Nicky's before asking what either of you could bear. He looked at the travelling case, then at her. If you leave for Winchester, my carriage is at your disposal, but not my command. If you stay, the gates remain open unless you request otherwise. The papers will not be redrawn until you tell me what they must say. Elspeth held the folded gown against her chest. No touch, no plea, no dramatic collapse, only the hardest thing a powerful man could offer, less power. You would let us leave? No's, he said, and her heart tightened. Then he finished, quietly, I would hate every foot of the road, but I would let you choose it. Aunt Matilda rose, gathering her embroidery. I shall see whether the soup has survived its scandal. She passed Valentine with a look that would have humbled Parliament and closed the door behind her. Elspeth and Valentine remained separated by the threshold and every year that had made it necessary. You hurt me, she said. Today? Yes, and before. But today matters because you knew more. I did. Do not ask forgiveness because you have named the error. I will not. Do not ask me to stay because you are afraid. He swallowed. I will not. Ask me what I want. Valentine bowed his head, and when he lifted it, his eyes were bare of strategy. What do you want, Elspeth? The question did not mend everything. It did not restore the years, nor erase the forged note, nor unmake Minerva's smile in the glass. But it opened a door without standing in front of it. Elspeth looked at the case, the certificate inside, the window where evening light lay over Brackenmere's lawns, and thought of Nicky asking whether people changed. I want the reckoning, she said, not at a luncheon, not in a ballroom where women applaud once a duke gives permission, in the clockroom at Westgrave House, with the timepieces present, with the solicitor, the rector, Mrs. Vale, Caleb, Mr. Knorr, the railway clerk, if he can be found, and my father, if he has courage enough to hear the truth he helped bury. Valentine's breath left him. Yes, I will lead the evidence. Yes, you will not speak over me. No, and when Nicky's name is spoken, it will be spoken first as a child's name, not a title's solution. His voice roughened. Yes. Elspeth looked at the torn papers in his hand. Then I will stay tonight, not because you opened the gates. She paused, and the truth cost more than pride, because you gave me the choice to pass through them. Valentine closed his eyes once, as if receiving mercy he knew better than to touch. From the nursery corridor came the faint ring of the brass lamb bell. Nicky had likely found the draught from the open window, or perhaps the house itself had breathed. Elspeth did not know. Valentine looked toward the sound, then back at her. I shall walk at your pace, he said. This time, she believed only this much. He meant to try. London received them beneath a low white sky, and Elspeth felt the old city close around the carriage wheels like a memory, pretending it had never done harm. 7 years had passed since she left, before dawn with Aunt Matilda and the brass lamb bell hidden in a travelling case. Yet the streets near Westgrave House still seemed to know the sound of her departure. The iron railings were freshly painted. The plane trees along the square had grown thicker. The house itself stood calm and pale behind its steps, with every window washed, every curtain correct, and every stone holding the kind of silence that great houses used to conceal how much they had witnessed. Nicky had remained at Brackenmere Hall with Mrs. Vale and Aunt Matilda's strictest written instructions, because Elspeth would not drag him through London's appetite before truth was ready. The brass lamb bell stayed with him, tied again to his wooden hoop at his own insistence. It can guard the broad beans, he had said gravely. The certificate copy travelled with Elspeth now, wrapped in linen inside a locked dispatch case that she carried herself. Valentine had not offered to take it. That restraint had become a language between them, still imperfect, but increasingly intelligible. Caleb Thorne met them in the Westgrave House morning room, with news waiting in his face before he spoke it aloud. The railway clerk has been found, Your Grace, Mr. Silas Bramley, formerly of the Waterloo cloakroom office. He now keeps accounts for a parcels agent near the river. Valentine looked to Elspeth first. She was still wearing her travelling gloves. Do you wish to see him today? He asked. The question steadied her because it did not pretend she was not tired, and did not decide that tiredness made her incapable. "Yes," she said, "before Sir Wilfrid learns he has been found." The parcels office near the river smelled of coal smoke, damp rope, and paper labels. Mr. Bramley proved to be a narrow man with thinning hair and an expression of deep professional regret, which in London often meant he had remembered something profitable too late. Caleb had already placed him under the persuasion of honest payment and the threat of solicitor attention, and the clerk stood behind a counter strewn with parcel books, twisting his cap between his hands. Valentine let Elspeth enter first. That, too, was noticed. Mr. Bramley bowed to the Duke, and then uncertainly to Elspeth. "My lady." "You kept a cloakroom packet in 1851, Elspeth said. "A packet connected to a token recently used to accuse me of travelling with a gentleman." Mr. Bramley swallowed. "I did not know the accusation, ma'am. I only knew the token when Mr. Thorne showed it. It was not ordinary issue. The number had been altered, scraped, then restamped." Caleb placed the false token from Sir Wilfrid's display on the counter beside a second object wrapped in brown paper. Mr. Bramley kept the old parcels register. The true token number led to a packet deposited under initials, not a name. Valentine's face remained still, but Elspeth felt his attention sharpen beside her. "What initials?" she asked. Mr. Bramley looked down. "W.P. ma'am." Later changed in the register to E.S., the room seemed to tilt, but Elspeth did not move. "W.P. Wilfrid Prowse." Caleb opened the brown wrapping. Inside lay a packet sealed long ago with wax darkened almost black. The paper had been folded, handled, stored, and forgotten by everyone except the person who had needed it hidden. Valentine's hand curled once at his side, but he did not reach. "Mrs. Staveley," he said quietly, using the name Devon had given her because the room did not yet deserve the other one. "Will you open it, or shall the solicitor?" "I will." Her fingers were steady until the wax broke. Then they were not. The first letter inside was hers. She knew it by the slant of the hand, thinner than usual, because she had written while sick with early pregnancy and fear. "Westgrave House, London," written in her own direction. July 1851. She unfolded it and saw the first line. "Valentine, I do not know whether this letter will reach you, but there is a child, and I will not let silence be the first inheritance it receives." The words blurred. She had not wept when Minerva smiled in the conservatory glass. She had not wept when she fled. She had not wept when Nicky was born after a night of pain and rain and Aunt Matilda's whispered courage. But the sight of her own young handwriting, brave and terrified and unanswered, pressed tears into her eyes before pride could forbid them. Valentine did not touch her. He stood close enough to catch her if she fell, and far enough to prove he knew she had not asked. "Read the rest later," Caleb said gently, pretending his own voice had not thickened. "There is more." Valentine lifted the next bundle only when Elspeth nodded. His letters returned, unopened, some marked undeliverable, some bearing smudged seals. He read one address and stopped. Lady Elspeth Marlowe, care of Mrs. Matilda Haverstock, Devonshire. His breath left him with such quiet force that even Mr. Bramley looked away. "I wrote this in August," he said, "after a solicitor found a Haverstock widow near Exeter. I thought it had failed because I had been wrong again." Elspeth unfolded the top letter. "My wife, if you hate me, write one word, and I will obey it. If you are afraid, write nothing but the place, and I will come without pride. If you believe I betrayed you, then I have earned the labor of truth, but not your danger. E. I should have said wife. Before any living soul could steal the word, I failed there before all else. She lowered the page. The room had become very small. The river noise outside seemed too distant to belong to the same world. You wrote this? She said. Yes, and I never knew. No. The final paper lay at the bottom of the packet, smaller, folded into a square. The hand was Minerva's. Elspeth knew it before the first line. Sir Wilfrid, let the clock teach her what she thinks she saw. If Elspeth believes the minute, she will do the rest. Keep his letters from reaching her until Westgrave has no wife left to defend and no child to complicate matters. Should there be one? No one spoke. Mr. Bramley's cap stopped twisting. Caleb looked as if he would have preferred a battlefield to that little office. Valentine read the line twice, not because he did not understand it, because understanding it once was too merciful. Should there be one? He said. The words were almost soundless. Elspeth folded the note with care, because tearing it would have pleased the part of Minerva that liked visible damage. She considered my child an inconvenience before she knew him. She considered you one first, Valentine said, and the grief in his voice did what anger could not. It named the root. Elspeth placed the pregnancy letter, his returned letters, and Minerva's instruction into Caleb's evidence folder, each witnessed by Mr. Bramley and signed across the record. The legal motions took only minutes. The emotional ones would take years. Back at Westgrave House, rain had begun against the morning room windows. Caleb went to dispatch word to the solicitor and to arrange Mr. Bramley's attendance at the reckoning. Elspeth remained standing by the table, her pregnancy letter open before her, reading again the sentence she had once sent into silence. There is a child, and I will not let silence be the first inheritance it receives. Valentine stood near the hearth. He had not sat since they returned. I have imagined many punishments for myself, he said. Most were arrogant. They kept me at the center. Today is worse because the punishment is not what I suffered. It is what you endured while believing I had chosen not to answer. Elspeth looked up. Do not make pain into a contest. I am trying not to. Then say what is true. He met her eyes. I failed you before I knew the letters were stolen. I failed you in the conservatory when I did not say wife quickly enough. I failed you afterward because believing you had rejected me was easier than admitting that a woman alone might not have been allowed to be heard. The tears she had controlled in the parcels office returned quieter now, more dangerous, because they were not shock, they were mourning. I wrote that letter with one hand on my stomach, she said. I thought if you knew, you might come. Then no answer came, and I told myself that was answer enough. I hated you for it, because hatred was easier than hoping again. Valentine took one step, then stopped. May I? The question was so simple that it shook her. Not may I explain. Not may I take the letter. Not may I be forgiven. He lifted his hand no farther than his chest, waiting. Elspeth understood. A tear had reached her cheek. 7 years ago, he would have touched first and trusted tenderness to excuse him. Now, he asked. She could have said no. The room would have held it. He would have lowered his hand. That was why she could answer. Yes. Valentine crossed the space slowly. With the back of one gloved finger, he brushed the tear from her cheek, as if touching a page that might tear if handled by force. Elspeth closed her eyes. She did not mean to lean into his hand. She did. Only a little. Enough that his breath changed. Enough that her own heart answered with an ache she had refused for 7 years and no longer had strength to misname. Elspeth, he whispered. The word held too much. Love, grief, apology wanting. She opened her eyes before any of it could become easier than truth. Not yet, she said softly. his hand lowered at once. I know. Say it when truth no longer hides behind us. He bowed his head. Then I will carry it until it can stand in the open. She looked down at Minerva's note, then toward the door, beyond which the clock-room waited to be prepared. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow," Valentine answered. At that same hour, in a hired carriage outside Westgrave House, Lady Minerva Staveley looked up through the rain and saw a footman carry a sealed evidence box inside. Through the briefly opened door, she glimpsed the false cloakroom token set beside a small clock key on a tray. Her face went white, not with innocence wounded, but with time returning to claim its debt. The clockroom at Westgrave House had never been meant for judgment, yet by noon it held every silence a judgment required. Long case clocks stood along the panelled walls like witnesses with brass faces and steady hearts. Bracket clocks rested upon shelves. A French mantel clock waited beneath glass. At the center of the room, on a long table covered in dark green baize, stood the Staveley conservatory automaton, recovered and cleaned but not repaired, its gilt shepherdess frozen mid-curtsy. Its tiny sheep halted in their unfinished circle, its hands still set to 11:17. Beside it lay the clock key, the household clock book, Abel Nor's sealed service slip, the false railway cloakroom token, Elspeth's pregnancy, letter, Valentine's returned letters, Minerva's instruction, and the certified copy of the marriage lines. The brass lamb bell was not there. Nicky had arrived that morning from Brackenmere with Aunt Matilda and Mrs. Vale, solemn and pale, but determined, and Elspeth had allowed him to carry the bell in his own hand until the final moment. "It isn't evidence before it's mine," he had said, with 6-year-old severity. "It may be both," Elspeth had answered, kneeling before him in the anteroom. "But only if you are willing." Now the bell lay on the table, because Nicky had placed it there himself, then retreated to Aunt Matilda's side, where Valentine had promised he need not speak unless he wished. The witnesses stood in careful arrangement. Mr. Hargreaves the solicitor, the rector who had performed the marriage, Mrs. Annis Vale, Caleb Thorne, Abel Nor, Mr. Silas Bramley, the railway clerk, 2 patronesses whose tongues could carry truth as efficiently as they had once carried suspicion. Lord Staveley, looking smaller than his title, Sir Wilfrid Prowse, with anger varnished into dignity, and Lady Minerva Staveley, dressed in white muslin, as if innocence were a fabric one could purchase. Valentine stood beside Elspeth, not before her. That had been her condition. She felt the heat of him near her sleeve, the contained force of his attention, and the restraint that had taken 7 years and several mistakes to learn. He did not open the proceeding. She did, 7 years ago, Elspeth said, and her voice sounded steadier than her hands felt. "I stood in the conservatory of Staveley House and saw what I was meant to see. I saw His Grace with my sister. I saw a clock stopped at 11:17. I heard Lady Minerva tell me I had come too late. Then I left before dawn, carrying my marriage lines and a bell made for a nursery that no one in society knew existed." A stir moved through the room. Lord Staveley shut his eyes. Minerva's lips parted, but Valentine spoke one word, quiet as a blade. "Wait." She waited, because the room did. Elspeth placed her gloved fingers beside the certified copy, not touching the ink. This proves the marriage of Valentine Marlowe, Duke of Westgrave, and Lady Elspeth Staveley on the 14th of May, 1851. By special license at Westgrave Private Chapel. The rector stepped forward. "I performed that marriage." Mrs. Vale's voice followed, plain and firm. "I witnessed it." Caleb bowed, as did I. Elspeth looked at her father. You knew enough to deny what you feared would inconvenience you. Lord Staveley's face crumpled, but she did not pause for his weakness. The child born on the 9th of February, 1852, is Nicholas Marlowe, lawful son of that marriage. Nicky's small hand found Aunt Matilda's black skirt and gripped it. Valentine did not turn toward him, though Elspeth knew every part of him wished to. He kept faith with the boy by letting his mother finish. Sir Wilfrid stepped forward, all very affecting, but the question is not merely marriage. It is conduct. Lady Elspeth vanished under circumstances that invited serious doubt. There was a railway token suggesting irregular company. Mr. Bramley cleared his throat. The token shown in Devon was altered. The true register entry was originally WP, not ES. The packet connected to it was deposited through a man known to Sir Wilfrid Prowse. Sir Wilfrid's cane struck the floor. A clerk's memory after 7 years. A clerk's register, Valentine said, and your own seal on the packet paper. Elspeth unfolded Minerva's note. She did not look at her sister yet. Inside that packet were my pregnancy letter, intercepted before it reached my husband, Valentine's letters, intercepted before they reached me, and this instruction. She read it aloud. Sir Wilfrid, let the clock teach her what she thinks she saw. If Elspeth believes the minute, she will do the rest. Keep his letters from reaching her until Westgrave has no wife left to defend and no child to complicate matters, should there be one. M. The white muslin lost its innocence. Minerva gripped her fan until the sticks bent. Anyone could have copied my hand. Perhaps, Elspeth said, but not your cruelty so perfectly. A patroness drew in a breath. Abel Knorr stepped forward with his hat crushed in both hands. I was apprentice to Mr. Venn, clockmaker. I wound the Staveley Conservatory clock at 10:42 that night. It ran clean. After midnight, Mr. Prowse had me called back. The clock had been stopped by hand and set to 11:17. Master Venn ordered the book altered later. I kept the service slip. Lies bought by Westgrave Gold. Sir Wilfrid snapped. Valentine's face hardened, but Elspeth lifted her hand slightly. He stopped. She turned to Minerva at last. Then answer me one precise question. Minerva's chin rose. I don't owe you theatre. Why did your note say the clock would teach me what I thought I saw, if you had not known I saw it in glass? The room held its breath. Minerva's eyes flicked to the automaton clock, then to Valentine, then to Sir Wilfrid. It was less than a second. It was enough. I meant only that she was always dramatic about time, Minerva said. No, Mrs. Vale said, surprising everyone. Her grace was never dramatic. She was quiet because loud people profited from it. Aunt Matilda murmured, Amen. Caleb placed the scraped clock book beside Abel's slip, the altered line, the service notation, the packet, the letters, the marriage copy, the bell. Small things, unfashionable things, things dismissed because women, servants, clerks, children, and apprentices had touched them. Together, they became a wall no rank could walk through. Sir Wilfrid's dignity began to peel. His debts surfaced under Mr. Hargreaves's calm questioning. Money owed, a hoped-for marriage arrangement involving Minerva, a need to remove Elspeth from legal recognition before any child complicated inheritance and influence. Lord Staveley sank into a chair. When told to acknowledge his daughter's status before witnesses, he looked toward Minerva first, then at last toward Elspeth. Lady Elspeth, he began. Valentine's voice came softly, terrible in its restraint. Her Grace. Lord Staveley swallowed. Her Grace, the Duchess of Westgrave. The words did not heal her childhood. They did not return the years. But they entered the room where silence had once ruled, and they stood. Valentine turned then, not to the villains, not to the patronesses, but to Nicky. "Nicholas Marlowe is my son," he said. His voice nearly broke but did not. "Yet he is not a solution to my house. He is a child I failed to know because adults chose lies, and because I did not speak truth quickly enough when truth first required me." Elspeth looked at him. This was the accountability she had needed, not the grand defense. The wound named correctly. Valentine faced the room. "I did not betray my wife's body, but I failed her name. In the conservatory, I knew Lady Minerva's scene was false, and I still allowed interruption, propriety, and my own habit of control to delay the word that mattered. Wife. I left my wife to walk out beneath a title I had not spoken loudly enough. No fraud committed against us erases that failure." Minerva began to cry then, but no one moved toward her. Tears had become a currency too often spent. Sir Wilfrid demanded solicitors, procedure, discretion. Mr. Hargreaves promised all three with such severity that Sir Wilfrid stopped speaking. The patronesses withdrew their recognition from Minerva by the simple act of turning their shoulders away. Lord Staveley did not look up. When the witnesses moved into the adjoining room to sign statements, the clockroom emptied slowly, leaving only the clocks, the evidence, Elspeth, Valentine, and Nicky, who came forward holding the brass bell with both hands. "Do the clocks mean we can go home now?" he asked. Elspeth knelt and touched his cheek. "They mean the lie has stopped." "And home?" Valentine crouched, not too close, never claiming space the boy had not offered. "Home will be where your mama is ready to go." Nicky studied him, then gave one serious nod and returned to Aunt Matilda, who had paused at the door. She took the boy out, closing the door halfway, not fully. Proper, merciful. Elspeth stood. For a moment she and Valentine faced each other across the table, where 7 years lay sorted into proof. "You said it," she whispered. "Too late. Yes, but this time you said it." His eyes shone, though no tear fell. "Elspeth, may I kiss you?" The question moved through her more deeply than any touch could have. He would not take even tenderness from the ruins without her consent. She stepped closer first and laid her fingers lightly upon his sleeve. Yes, the kiss was gentle, brief enough for propriety, deep enough for truth. It did not erase grief. It gave grief somewhere to rest. When he lifted his head, his voice was unsteady in a way no ballroom had ever heard. "I love you, Elspeth. I loved you badly when I was afraid. But I love you truthfully now." She felt the words enter not as rescue, not as payment, but as something offered open-handed. "I love you, Valentine," she said, "not because you restored my name, but because you gave me back my choice." His hand turned beneath hers, waiting. She placed her fingers in his. Outside the half-open door, the brass lamb bell rang once in Nicky's hand, small and clear, and for the first time the sound did not ask to be believed. It was heard. By late summer, Brackenmere Hall no longer sounded like a house holding its breath. Windows stood open to the Hampshire air. Footmen crossed the hall without whispering themselves into corners. Mrs. Vale allowed a vase of late roses on the entrance table, though she declared the arrangement temporary and became suspiciously busy whenever anyone praised it. The great clocks still marked the hours with Marlowe precision, but their sound no longer ruled the rooms. It accompanied them. That was different. Elspeth learned the difference slowly, as she learned many things after truth had been spoken aloud. Public recognition had not mended life in a single golden afternoon. It had brought letters, solicitor visits, formal calls, careful apologies, and a great many people discovering that their earlier silence had been a misunderstanding of facts rather than a weakness of character. Elspeth accepted no false humility from them. When Mrs. Aveling wrote to say how relieved she was that matters had been clarified, Elspeth answered with courtesy and no invitation. When the two patronesses who had witnessed the clockroom reckoning carried the truth through London drawing rooms, they did so with the efficient horror of women who had nearly backed the wrong scandal and wished to be seen correcting it. Sir Wilfrid Prowse lost more than reputation. Mr. Hargreaves moved with quiet force through the evidence of intercepted letters, altered records, bribed servants, and the attempted theft at Brackenmere. Debts that Sir Wilfrid had hidden beneath polish came into daylight. Men who had once bowed to him at clubs discovered pressing business elsewhere. His name remained in solicitor correspondence for some time, coldly handled and increasingly expensive. Minerva was not ruined in the theatrical way she would have understood, that might have flattered her. She was removed. Lord Staveley, pale with anger and fear of his own diminishing influence, sent her to a distant aunt in Yorkshire whose house was respectable, draughty, and almost entirely without young gentlemen. Minerva wrote once to Elspeth, blaming everyone but herself. Elspeth read only the first line, then placed the letter, unopened beyond that, into the fire. Valentine saw her do it, and said nothing, which was perhaps the finest answer he could have given. Lord Staveley came to Brackenmere in August, not because courage had bloomed late in him, but because society had made cowardice inconvenient. He stood in the morning room, hat clutched before him, and addressed her as "Your Grace," with such effort that Aunt Matilda later declared she feared for his digestion. Elspeth did not embrace him. She did not scold him either. She allowed him to see Nicky in the garden for 10 minutes under Mrs. Vale's supervision, and when he referred to the boy as the heir, Nicky looked up from a beetle and said, "I'm Nicky before breakfast, and I don't see why I should be anything else after luncheon." Valentine had turned away to cough. Elspeth had not. She had smiled fully, and Lord Staveley had learned, perhaps for the first time, that a child could be better defended by love than by lineage. Nicky's formal acknowledgement came properly, with documents signed in a room where Elspeth sat beside Valentine and read every word before permitting her own signature. Nicholas Marlowe, lawful son of Valentine Marlowe, Duke of Westgrave, and Lady Elspeth Marlowe, Duchess of Westgrave. The wording mattered. Order mattered. Consent mattered. Valentine did not touch the pen until she handed it to him. Afterward, Nicky was told only what he could carry, that his father had not known where he was, that his mother had protected him, that he had a longer name if he wished to use it for formal things, but no one who loved him would make him bow beneath it. "May I still be Nicky in the orchard?" he asked. "Always," Elspeth said, "even if I am very old." Valentine answered then, voice sank. Especially then. That afternoon Elspeth held the first meeting of the Garden School Fund in the East Parlour, not as a performance for charitable approval, but because she had chosen it. Before rank had been returned to her, tenant widows came in their best gowns and sat uneasily upon chairs that looked too fine for practical conversation. Elspeth had the chairs rearranged into a circle and ordered seed catalogues, slates, and tea. Strong enough to be useful, the fund would support children of tenant widows and labourers in learning letters, accounts, kitchen gardening, and enough botany to recognize both plant and poison. Valentine entered only when invited, signed the endowment papers without improving her plan, and left when she gave him a look that said his usefulness had been completed for the moment. Later, he found her in the corridor and said, with solemn admiration, "I have rarely been dismissed so efficiently. You have rarely deserved it so gently," she replied. His smile came slowly. Smiles still surprised her. Not because he had never possessed them, but because this one asked nothing. It simply stood near her and warmed the space between them. By September, the orchard below the south lawn had turned gold at the edges. Nicky had been given a narrow bed beneath a young apple tree for his seedlings, though he insisted the broad beans required a title because of past service. The brass lamb bell, no longer needed as evidence, had spent several weeks travelling between his pocket, the nursery hook, and Elspeth's writing table, as if the house itself could not decide where memory should rest. On the first cool morning of autumn, Nicky brought it to Valentine in both hands. "It needs a place where it can be heard by everyone, but not owned by anyone," he announced. "A legal difficulty," Valentine said gravely. "Mama says most legal difficulties improve if people are honest before writing." "Your mama is correct." Nicky considered the orchard. There, he pointed to a low branch of the young apple tree beside his seedbed. "Not the cradle. I'm too large for the cradle. Not the clock room. That was for stopping lies. Here is for growing things." Elspeth stood a little apart, her shawl gathered against the breeze, and felt the quiet rightness of the choice. Valentine looked to her, still asking. Even now, she nodded. Together, they fastened the faded blue ribbon around the branch. Valentine lifted Nicky so he could make the knot himself, and the boy's serious concentration made Mrs. Vale dab openly at her eyes from the path while insisting the wind was troublesome. When the bell hung free, Nicky tapped it once. The sound moved through the orchard, softer than it had been in the clockroom, freer than it had been in the nursery. "It sounds happy," Nicky said. Aunt Matilda, seated on a bench with a rug over her knees, sniffed. "Bells don't sound happy. People do." "Then perhaps we are," Nicky said, and ran to show Caleb the broad beans, leaving the adults with a truth too large for immediate speech. Elspeth watched him go. "I used to think the bell proved he had been imagined before he was born," she said. "It did," Valentine answered. "No," she touched the branch lightly. "It proved he was meant to be heard. There is a difference." Valentine stood beside her, close but not crowding. "I am learning it still. So am I." Below the orchard wall, Brackenmere tenants were gathering for the school fund's first harvest breakfast. There would be formal greetings soon, names to remember, children to praise, women to listen to with more care than charity usually afforded them. But for the moment, the orchard held them apart from duty. Elspeth looked at Valentine's hand. He did not offer it first. Perhaps once that would have hurt her. Now she understood the space as trust. She slid her hand into his. His fingers closed gently around hers, and only then did he lift her hand, not to claim it, but to hold it where both could see. "I love you," he said. No anguish this time, no public confession, only the daily truth after the storm had passed. Elspeth leaned toward him, and when he bent, he kissed her brow with the tenderness of a man who knew affection was not proof of ownership, but an answer freely renewed. "I love you too," she said, "even when I'm dismissing you from meetings. Especially then." She laughed, and the sound startled a nearby blackbird from the grass. Valentine's eyes brightened at hearing it. But he did not make too much of it, which made her love him more. Nicky called from the lower path. "Mama, His Grace says broad beans cannot be knighted." "His Grace is unusually sensible this morning," Elspeth called back. "Papa," Nicky corrected. Not loudly, not ceremonially, simply because the word had become ready. Valentine went still. Elspeth felt it through his hand. Across the orchard, Nicky had already turned back to Caleb, unaware that he had changed the weather of a man's heart with one small word. Valentine did not move toward the boy. He did not seize the moment and make it grand. His hand tightened once around Elspeth's, then steadied. "Did you hear?" he whispered. "Yes, I will not make him repeat it." After a moment, she added, "He will when he wants to." Valentine's breath trembled. I know. They walked down the orchard path together, not quickly. Below them waited tenants, breakfast, work, school slates, seed beds, and a life no longer suspended at 11:17. Behind them, from the low apple branch, the brass lamb bell rang in the autumn wind. It rang above Nicky's seedlings and the loyal broad beans. It rang where no one had to hide it, polish it into evidence, or carry it into exile. Elspeth, Valentine, and Nicky stood beneath the branch before joining the others. Their hands linked for one quiet moment. The bell sounded again, small and clear, not asking to be believed, not begging to be heard, but belonging at last to a home that listened.